Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of the Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in the Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Oath or affirmations, announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator the Honorable Daryl Alaha and Senator Michael S.V. Baptiste, SC, both of whom are ill, and Senator the Honorable Dominic Smith, who is out of the country. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from Her Excellency, the President, Christine Carla Kangaloo, ORTT. By Her Excellency Christine Carla Kangaloo, ORTT, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Mr. Andrew Ramsubi, whereas Senator the Honorable Daryl Alaha is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of illness, now, therefore, I, Christine Carla Kangaloo, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(b) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Andrew Ramsubi, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 24th February 2026 and continuing during the absence of Senator the Honorable Daryl Allaha by reason of illness, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President, St. Anne's, this 24th day of February 2026. To Mr. Rishi Tripathi. Whereas Senator the Honorable Dominic Smith is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Christine Carla Kangulu, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, do hereby appoint you, Rishi Tripathi, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 24th February 2026 and continuing during the absence of Senator the Honorable Dominic Smith from Trinidad and Tobago, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President, St. Anne's, this 24th day of February 2026. To Dr. Deborah McPhee. Whereas Senator Michael Simon Victor de la Bastide, SC, is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of illness. Now, therefore, I, Christine Carla Kangulu, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(b) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Deborah McPhee, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 23rd February 2026 and continuing during the absence of Senator Michael Simon Victor de la Bastide, SC, by reason of illness, given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President, St. Anne's, this 24th day of February 2026. Honorable Senators, Senators are required to take the oath. May we all stand?
I, Andrew Ramsabik, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by the Bhagavad Gita that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter. I, Rishi Tripathi, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by the Bhagavad Gita that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Dr. Deborah McPhee, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Papers.
The Minister of Planning, Economic Affairs and Development, and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Mr. President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper standing in the name of the Minister of Finance. The report of the Auditor General of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Sugar Industry Labour Welfare Committee for the financial year ended September 30th, 2009, the annual administrative report of the National Enterprise Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2024, the annual administrative report of the Ministry of Finance for the fiscal year 2022-2023.
Minister of Tertiary Education and Skills Training.
Mr. President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper as listed in the order paper in my name, the annual administrative report of the Youth Training and Employment Partnership Program for the fiscal year 2021-2022.
Urgent questions.
Senator Rajman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Urgent question to the Minister of Works and Infrastructure. Given reports of inconsistent arrival and departure of the NV Blue Wave Harmony and its impact on consumer goods in Tobago, can the Minister indicate or state when will the trial phase end and a regular sailing schedule be published?
The Honourable Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to answer this question on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Works and Infrastructure. I can advise that the Blue Wave Harmony remains in its sea trial phase, which is scheduled to conclude at the end of February 2026, subject to the successful completion of all required operational and safety assessments. The sea trial timeline for operations of the full onboarding of the Blue Wave Harmony was stated in a public statement issued by the Port Authority on Saturday, 21st of February, and was publicly circulated via the media and official digital platforms. Night berthing exercises are due to commence tomorrow, February 25th, 2026, as part of the final evaluation stage, after which the vessel is expected to transition into full commercial and passenger operations. A regularized sailing program is being prepared, and consistent with established practice, the schedule will be published this Friday, providing at least 1 week of confirmed sailings at a time. The government, the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, and NITCO remain focused on a safe and efficient service for the people and businesses of Tobago.
Senator Rajman.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. President, I have two supplementals for the Minister. Minister, you indicated that a schedule will be published this Friday. Can you indicate if that will be the schedule going forward, or is that the schedule during the trial period, temporary schedule, or that is the schedule we'll expect going forward?
Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation.
Mr. President, as I indicated, the regularized sailing program will be published 1 week at a time.
Yes, Senator Rajman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, through you, one other question for the Minister, please. Could the Minister also indicate the expected port-to-port duration, meaning the expected duration based on that schedule, the duration between departure from one port and arrival at the other port based on that schedule? Thank you.
I don't have that information with me. If you submit it, we'll provide it in writing, Senator.
Provide it in writing, or you wanted us
We'll
to
provide it in
submit
writing.
Thank you.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, we're prepared to answer questions 36 and 38. We are asking for a 2-week deferral on question 37 pursuant to Standing Order 2714.
Okay. Okay, Senator Melanie Roberts Rajman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 36 to the Minister of Homeland Security, please.
The Honourable Minister of Homeland Security.
Mr. President, and thank you for the question from the Honourable Senator. In accordance with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service policy on the use and review of private closed-circuit television footage in investigations, information can be acquired in 3 main ways. 1, being voluntary bought, where somebody brings something voluntarily to the police. 2, consent given to access the footage. And 3, by means of a warrant in times of reluctance and non-cooperation. Mr. President, the policy remains standardized as follows. In cases where the footage is bought by private individuals voluntarily, the process involving recording statements to assist experts in extracting and/or recording. In the case where individuals give consent to access and extract digital evidence from closed-circuit television devices, a consent form is requested to be read and endorsed. In cases where the private individuals exhibit reluctance and is not willing to share the evidence that they may have acquired privately from CCTV footage, the subject investigator has authority to obtain a warrant in order to acquire the necessary digital evidence. After extraction, the investigator will consider the contents of the relevance in the investigation. And as usual, and the usual protocol will be carried out to ensure integrity and admissibility for court purposes. According to the Commissioner of Police, Mr. President, this is the information.
Senator Rajman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, through you to the Minister. Minister, you indicated that the footage is then assessed for integrity and admissibility in court proceedings. Is this the same assessment that is applied where the investigation is into the performance of policing activity? Because the question was about it being used in investigating policing activity, so police conduct.
The Honourable Minister of Homeland Security.
Yes, Mr. President.
Any further supplemental, Senator? Okay.
Minister, I'm very glad that you put on the record. I'm asking the question,
Question.
I'm asking the question, Mr. President. Mr. Minister, based on the response to the question that you gave, is it that step 2 could be bypassed and go straight to step 3? In other words, if the police requires the information, is it that they will not ask and go straight for a warrant to get the information?
The Honourable Minister of Homeland Security.
Mr. President, I have outlined the procedures involved in obtaining CCTV footage from private citizens.
Any further question? You have any? Okay, Senator Rajma.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, question number 37 to the... 38. Oh, we're not doing 37. Sorry, I just realized. Sorry. Question number 38 to the Minister of Homeland Security.
The Honourable Minister of Homeland Security.
Mr. President, and again, Honourable Member, thank you for your question. The answer is no. No. Underline the word no. It is not the government's intention to introduce legislation prohibiting, regulating, or otherwise altering the public's ability to release, share, or publish footage of police-involved incidents. However, Mr. President, the government remains committed to transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. In this regard, it is strongly advised that any such footage be provided in the first instance to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to assist in the investigation and the conduct of official investigation. So you are assisting in the investigation and the conduct of that investigation. This ensures that evidence is properly secured, assessed, and preserved in accordance with established legal and procedural standards. That is my answer, Mr. President.
Senator Rajma.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minister, just one supplemental, please. You indicated that it is strongly advised. Can you just clarify whether it's a mandate to the public or just general, a call to the public then? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Homeland Security.
Mr. President, strongly advised, and I will continue to say this, strongly advised, and I suggest we underline the word strongly advised.
By ministers or parliamentary secretaries.
The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in this honorable House with great pride to share details of a significant and positive development that signals new momentum for the people of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, specifically the removal of the Trinidad and Tobago from the European Union's list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes, what we commonly call the blacklist. This is a proud moment in our nation's economic journey, made possible by the visionary leadership of the Honorable Kamala Prasad, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the support of my parliamentary and cabinet colleagues, and the tireless dedication of our public servants and technical officers working together for the progress of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. President, on February 17, 2026, the Council of the European Union formally confirmed that Trinidad and Tobago has been removed from the list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes. The decision followed a careful and comprehensive review of our country's compliance with international standards on tax transparency, fairness, and the implementation of anti-base erosion measures. Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago was first placed on that list of non-cooperative jurisdictions in 2017 under the then PNM administration. This followed the identification of several deficiencies under international tax transparency standards, including Trinidad and Tobago did not have a rating of at least largely compliant by the Global Forum for Exchange of Information on Request. The country had not signed and ratified the OECD Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance as amended. Trinidad and Tobago had harmful preferential tax regimes. The country did not implement the base erosion and profit shifting minimum standard on country-by-country reporting, and it did not have a determination of at least in place, but needs improvement on core requirements 1 and 2 in the Global Forum peer review report on the automatic exchange of financial account information. Mr. President, imagine this. Since 2017, the PNM knew that Trinidad and Tobago was on this list. They knew the consequences. They knew the reputational damage. They knew the impact on investor confidence, international credibility, and our country's standing. And yet, after years in office, they still did not do enough to get Trinidad and Tobago off the list. Today, we stand in a different moment. Within just a few months of the UNC coming into office, through rigorous work, diligent follow-through, and serious engagement, we are happy to say here today that progress was delivered, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago are seeing the benefit. Mr. President, the EU's list of non-cooperative jurisdictions is not some harmless administrative label. It identifies countries that fail to meet agreed international standards on tax transparency, exchange of information, and fair taxation. For Trinidad and Tobago, being placed on that list came with real consequences, serious consequences. It hurt investor confidence. It made financial transactions with European unions and European institutions by business and financial institutions more difficult and costly. It increased due diligence requirements for our domestic financial sector. It exposed us as a country to the risk of defensive measures by EU member states, and it damaged this country's international reputation. Mr. President, this was a national embarrassment that the PNM presided over. Knowing all of this, Mr. President, what did this previous administration do? They came to this parliament with bits and pieces of poorly drafted legislation and wanted applause for activity. But after all their noise, Trinidad and Tobago was still on the list. Today, I am proud to say that it took this government 9 months to accomplish what the PNM failed to do in 9 years. But, Mr. President, we must ask ourselves, why did they allow this matter to languish for so long? Our citizens must judge for themselves who may have benefited from the deliberate sloppiness of the former government, which facilitated weak tax transparency, the absence of proper legislation, and a system that allowed money to be hidden, taxes to be avoided, and our revenue streams as a country to be compromised while the country remained on the EU blacklist. Mr. President, the removal of our country from the EU's list signals renewed confidence in our financial governance framework. It strengthens our standing with international investors and trading partners. It improves our ability to access capital and to engage with global markets without stigma or suspicion. It also enhances our reputation as a responsible and compliant member of international financial community. For 9 years, Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago remained on that list, longer than most of the jurisdictions originally listed in 2017. The vast majority of the 17 original countries listed secured removal by March 2019 by taking swift legislative and administrative action. But, Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago was kept blacklisted for nearly a decade. In 2017, under the PNM, Trinidad and Tobago blacklisted. In 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, in 2025, Mr. President, under the PNM, Trinidad and Tobago blacklisted. In 2026, under this Kamala Persad-Bissessar-led administration, Trinidad and Tobago was finally removed from that blacklist. Mr. President, when this administration assumed office in May 2025, the matter was still unresolved. From the very beginning, this government made it absolutely clear that restoring Trinidad and Tobago's international credibility would be a matter of national priority. We coordinated the technical teams and sent a high-level delegation, including the Ministry of Finance, the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Central Bank, and the Registrar General's Department to Romania in June 2025 for the Global Forum Process Assessment. It was this government, Mr. President, it was this government that defended Trinidad and Tobago's position and reputation in relation to the second round phase 2 exchange of information on request peer review on-site examination report. Mr. President, that report was successfully adopted. Thereafter, it was submitted to all Global Forum members for comments, and the final rating was published in July 2025, with Trinidad and Tobago receiving an overall rating of largely compliance. But we did not stop there, Mr. President. We also moved to strengthen the institutional foundations required for sustained compliance. So when the Global Forum report was published on the 2nd of December 2025, Trinidad and Tobago was cleared on the automatic exchange of information issue. Mr. President, as at the European Union's regular update on February 18, 2025, Trinidad and Tobago remained on the EU list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes. In plain language, Mr. President, the international community was still not satisfied that the requirements for removal had been met. This was just over 2 months before the 28th of April 2025 general election, the very election in which the people of Trinidad and Tobago rejected that administration at the polls. So, Mr. President, those opposite cannot now pretend that delisting was somehow sitting on a shelf waiting to happen. It was not. If it was so easy, if it was so automatic, if they had truly completed their job and did their duty, then Trinidad and Tobago would not have remained blacklisted year after year, review after review, update after update while they were in office. Mr. President, the truth is that they had the time, they had the resources, they had the people What they lacked was the political will. They left this country with a burden still hanging over its head, Mr. President. Now that this administration has entered and delivered progress, they want to rewrite history and attach themselves to the outcome. And because those opposite continue to play politics with the truth, allow me to outline briefly the decisive milestones recognized under this administration that contributed to this outcome. First, the government advanced outstanding reforms to Trinidad and Tobago's tax transparency framework, strengthening international cooperation in the exchange of tax information and moving the country from delay to delivery. Second, under this administration, Trinidad and Tobago secured an overall largely compliant rating under the Global Forum's Exchange of Information on Request standard in July 2025. Third, the requirements for the automatic exchange of financial account information was satisfied and validated by December 2025, bringing Trinidad and Tobago into alignment with internationally accepted standards and addressing one of the key concerns identified in the EU screening process. Finally, Mr. President, progress was advanced under the OECD base erosion and profit shifting inclusive framework, including measures to support country-by-country reporting and strengthen protections against profit shifting by multinational enterprises. Mr. President, these were coordinated technical, policy, and legal steps taken under this administration to move Trinidad and Tobago off a path of non-compliance and towards international credibility. These reforms delivered a full package of technical work, legislative measures, administrative action, and institutional strengthening on which the European Union relies in determining whether a country has met the threshold for removal. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the point has been made clearly. Delisting strengthens Trinidad and Tobago's international standing and provides a more stable platform for business expansion, cross-border partnerships, and long-term economic growth. It reflects a capacity for Trinidad and Tobago to meet the highest international standards when there is focus, coordination, and accountability. But it proves something else. Decisive governance matters. When reforms are pursued with urgency, seriousness, and discipline, results follow. Mr. President, no amount of PNM propaganda, misdirection, or machinations will distract this government from its duty to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. As we observe the penitential seasons of Lent and Ramadan, I urge the PNM to reflect, to repent, and to seek forgiveness from the people of Trinidad and Tobago who suffered due to their inaction and mismanagement. We have delivered this outcome in the national interest, and we will continue to safeguard it in the national interest. Mr. President, before I close, I want to place on record my sincere appreciation to the Honorable Prime Minister for her faith and trust that she has placed in me as her Minister of Finance, and to the public servants and technical officers across the state for their invaluable service and diligent work in advancing the national interest and restoring Trinidad and Tobago's international credibility. With those words, Mr. President, I thank you.
Senator Forrest and Maury.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise under Standing Order 23-4. May I? Would the Honourable Minister indicate what specific visionary action, to use his words, the Honourable Prime Minister did to cause the success in the on-site second round peer review which occurred in Trinidad and Tobago in the period October 21st to 24th, 2024, which event generated the report that was presented in Romania in June 2025 and which gave us the removal from the EU list. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. President, I don't mean to be mean to my colleague opposite. If he was the Honourable Attorney General at the time and has no idea of what was done, that's very unfortunate. But, Mr. President, as I have the opportunity to respond to my colleague on the other side, this is the same gentleman, Mr. President, who stood in a press conference and spoke about measures dealing with insurance that had nothing to do at all with what we are discussing here today. Similarly, Mr. President, the honorable member is trying to insert himself in a matter in which he has already failed, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but for 9 years, Mr. President. I urge the member opposite, I will share a copy of my contribution so he would be edified as to what was done to get the Trinidad and Tobago off the EU blacklist that they allowed and facilitated. Thank you, Mr. President.
The Honourable Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation.
Mr. President, I rise to give an update to this Honourable House on the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Amendment 2026. Mr. President, on January 16, 2026, the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill for the introduction and implementation of fixed penalty warnings for specific traffic violations in the 9th schedule was passed in the other place, and on January 20, 2026 was passed in this Honourable House. It was assented on January 29, 2026, and I'm happy to report that the Act is going to be proclaimed on Monday, March 2, 2026. Mr. President, I'll now proceed to give a brief synopsis outlining the means by which the fixed penalty warning system operates. Where a constable defined in the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act to include a police officer, a transport officer, a traffic warden, and an estate constable employed under the Supplemental Police Act in a public body listed in the 8th schedule has reason to believe that any traffic violation specified in the proposed 11th schedule is being or has been committed, the constable shall issue a fixed penalty warning. In circumstances where the driver is present, the warning may be handed directly to the driver. Where the driver is not present, the warning may be affixed to a visible part of the vehicle, ensuring that the motorist is properly notified of the infraction. Once a fixed penalty warning is issued or affixed, the responsibility for the violation rests with the driver or, where necessary, the registered owner of the vehicle. The warning clearly identifies the nature of the violation, the steps required to remedy it, the time frame within compliance must occur, and the location at which the driver owner must report and provide evidence that the defect has been complied with. The driver owner is then afforded a reasonable opportunity with either a 3 or 7 business days window based on the violation to correct the issue by repairing a defect. After doing so, the driver owner is required to report to a police station and office to the licensing authority as specified in the warning and to produce evidence of compliance within the prescribed period. Upon satisfactory verification, the driver owner will be issued a certificate of compliance. That compliance serves as confirmation that the requirements of the fixed penalty warning have been met and the results in the driver and owner be discharged from any further liability in respect of the violation. The matter is thereby resolved within the need for a fine, court proceedings, or further enforcement action. However, in the event that the driver owner fails to remedy the defect or fails to report within the time frame, the fixed penalty warning automatically converts to a fixed penalty notice. In those circumstances, the driver owner becomes liable to pay the prescribed fine, just as if the fixed penalty notice had been issued in the first instance. Mr. President, the Ministry of Transport and Civil Aviation has taken necessary steps to ensure that the proposed fixed penalty warning system will be ready for immediate implementation upon proclamation of the Act. The Ministry has embarked on weekly meetings with the relevant information technology personnel, inclusive of the architect of the U-turn system, the technological system upon which the fixed penalty system operates. Mr. President, the Ministry carefully developed and refined the methods and procedures, both internal and external, by which the fixed penalty warning system will operate. The framework includes the introduction of a mandatory warning layer within the U-turn system, which requires a constable to issue a warning rather than a fixed penalty notice in respect to 18 violations. The 18 violations are as follows: no identification lights for illumination of identification marks on vehicles at night, number of passengers to be carried not printed on the front door of taxi, no tear and MGW painted on vehicles, vehicle with defective fittings, vehicle without silencers or fitted with cutouts, unauthorized lights to front or rear vehicles, unauthorized letters and figures on vehicles, vehicles without 2 headlamps, vehicles without park lights, vehicle without tail lights, no left-hand drive notice affixed to appropriate vehicle, vehicle without horn, permitting excess sparks, smoke, visible vapor from vehicle, vehicle without reflecting mirror, use of noisy vehicle, use of vehicle with no windshield wiper or defective wiper, public service vehicle without spare tire, placing advertisement on side of window of taxi. Mr. President, the ministry also conducted meetings and training exercises with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, members of the Traffic Enforcement Center Unit, and the Licensing Authority. All stakeholders became well acquainted with the operation and the necessary functionality required to not only maintain the working of the U-turn system, but also in the event of a system issue or in the absence of a fixed penalty device. The ministry has therefore printed over 300 physical fixed penalty warnings and certificate of compliance booklets to be distributed to the relevant locations across the nation. A sample of the forms contained in these booklets was approved and will be published in the Trinidad and Tobago Gazette pursuant to the new section 8 to A7. Electronic versions of these forms will also be published in the Gazette. Mr. President, public notices will also be published in the daily newspapers and on social media to ensure that motorists are fully informed of the commencement and operation of the fixed penalty warning system. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Honourable Attorney General and the staff of the Attorney General's Office, the Ministry of Transport and Civil Aviation, and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for their commitment, collaboration, and invaluable contribution to the successful development and implementation of this system. The government recognizes that the success of any legislative measure depends not only on its passage, but on its effective execution, and the dedication of these stakeholders has laid the foundation for the effective implementation of this system upon proclamation. Mr. President, I thank you.
Yes. Speak, yes.
On Standing Order 23-4, may I?
Yes.
Will the Honourable Minister please indicate whether, pending proclamation as indicated, this wicked system of implementation of fines and penalties that were increased on the night of Christmas is still in effect?
The Honourable Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation.
Mr. President, the increase in fines went into effect on January 1, 2026, and yes, they are still in effect, Mr. President.
Members' business, motions.
Honourable Senators, honourable members, the debate on the following motion, which was in progress when the Senate adjourned on Wednesday, November the 26th, 2025, will be resumed. Be it resolved that this Senate call upon the government to table in Parliament within the next 12 months a comprehensive national strategic plan inclusive of a legislative framework to eliminate these barriers to social and economic exclusion, thereby enabling all persons to participate fully in public life with dignity and independence. Honourable Senators, on the last occasion, Wednesday, November the 26th, 2025, there were 7 speakers on this motion. Senator Alicia Lalit Etienne, mover, the Honorable Vandana Mohit, Minister of the People, Social Development and Family Service, Senator Dr. Amy Brown, Senator Anthony Vieira SC, Senator the Honorable Philip Alexander, Minister in the Ministry of Housing, Senator Janelle John Bates, and the final speaker who is still addressing this Senate, was addressing the Senate at the time of the adjournment and did not conclude her presentation. Senator Dr. Desiree Marie. And Dr. Marie, Senator Marie, you have 21 minutes left to conclude your contribution. Senator Desiree Marie.
Mr. President, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to complete my contribution to the private member's motion brought by Senator Lalit Etienne, calling for a comprehensive national strategic plan supported by an appropriate legislative framework to ensure equality of treatment, improved access to public services, and improved employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. As you noted, my contribution commenced on 26 November 2025, but was interrupted mid-stride due to time constraints. But Mr. President, what I thought was a tragedy was a blessing. Sorry, I can't behave myself. Anyway, as a result, I was able to reflect more deeply on this important subject and to now continue the discussion with greater perspective. And I am grateful for the additional 21 minutes. Mr. President, a lot has happened since last November, including Christmas, New Year, and one of the safest carnivals on record. For which we commend the hardworking men and women in the protective services. Over the last 3 months, several bills were debated in this chamber, and most were passed with the support of the independent bench. Indeed, at the 22nd sitting of this Senate on Tuesday, 10th February 2026, the Honorable Attorney General acknowledged, and I quote, "It is not unusual that we have support from the independents." We were even entertained by Senator Nakid's recital of a soliloquy from Shakespeare's Macbeth. Interestingly, Shakespeare often used the eye and vision as metaphors for insight and understanding. In King Lear, references to the eyes and seeing emerge from the very beginning of the play. Both King Lear and Gloucester misjudge their children, which constitutes a form of figurative blindness, a lack of insight into the true characters of those closest to them. As the old adage goes, there are none so blind as those who will not see. The literal and brutal blinding of Gloucester, whose eyes were senselessly gouged out, renders him physically helpless. Yet, it is only after he loses his physical sight that he gains moral clarity and greater insight into the character of his two sons, reflecting the irony that it is only when Gloucester is blind that he can see things for what they truly are. That story resonates as powerfully today as it did circa 1605 when King Lear was written by William Shakespeare. Despite, or sometimes because of physical constraints, many persons with disabilities develop exceptional adaptability, resilience, creativity, critical thinking skills, and attention to detail. Across our society, they are innovators, artists, entrepreneurs, and leaders. The World Health Organization and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities make it clear that disability is not inherent in the individual. It is created by the interaction between impairment and an environment that fails to accommodate diversity. When systems and spaces are inaccessible, disability is intensified. Conversely, when environments are inclusive, disability is reduced. Despite the invisible hurdles that exist, many persons with disabilities have made substantial contributions to our nation. Our first Prime Minister, Dr. Eric Williams, reportedly developed hearing difficulties following an injury sustained while playing football at Queen's Royal College. Dr. Emmanuel Hussein, a former Minister of Health and Minister of Gender and Women's Affairs, was diagnosed with polio as a child and was paralyzed for 6 months. After spending a year at the Princess Elizabeth Home, undergoing several surgeries and intense rehabilitation, he learned to walk again but was left with a limp. He became a strong advocate for the disabled community. Former Prime Minister and President of the Republic, A.N.R. Robinson, lived with glaucoma, which eventually affected his sight. In fact, I recall Attorney General Anthony Smart, former Attorney General, recounting a fascinating story about Mr. Robinson's glaucoma eye drops during the 1990 attempted coup. Even while held hostage, arrangements were made to have his glaucoma medication delivered to the Red House because without it, irreversible blindness could result. According to the 2000 national census, 45,496 persons in Trinidad and Tobago were living with disabilities, approximately 4.1% of respondents. So just imagine the even greater contributions that could be realized if we implemented a comprehensive national strategy that ensured genuine equality of treatment and equitable access. Section 4B of our Constitution enshrines the right of the individual to equality before the law. And Section 4D guarantees the right of the individual to equality of treatment from any public authority in the exercise of any functions. However, persistent gaps between policy intent and lived experience show that formal equality alone is not always sufficient. True inclusion requires equity, recognizing different needs and circumstances to ensure fair outcomes. Key barriers in Trinidad and Tobago exist in employment, education, and infrastructure. Persons with disabilities experience higher unemployment and underrepresentation in the workforce. They experience insufficient support in our schools, and public buildings and transportation systems remain largely inaccessible. These barriers stem from system design, not from disability itself. A national plan should therefore rest on 4 pillars. 1, legislative reform. 2, infrastructure upgrades. 3, education and employment initiatives. And 4, public awareness and stigma reduction. There is a compelling economic case for disability-confident employment. Persons with disabilities seek decent work, not dependency. In fact, in my own practice, one of my best employees has a physical disability following a road traffic accident in 2016. With appropriate assistive technologies, accessible digital platforms, and flexible work arrangements, many persons with disabilities can excel in roles such as IT professional, web designer, public relations officers, bank tellers, teachers, project managers, and even broadcast journalists. Inclusive employment reduces state expenditure on disability grants, increases tax and national insurance contributions, and strengthens national productivity. Disability-confident employers consistently report benefits such as improved retention, higher morale, reduced absenteeism, and access to a broader talent pool. The public service, as the largest employer in this country, is uniquely positioned to lead by example. By embedding accessibility into digital systems, recruitment portals, training platforms, and performance management processes, the state can demonstrate that inclusion is a core principle, not an afterthought. The recent passage of the Land Acquisition Requisition Order 2025, enabling the state's acquisition of lands at Cove Estate for a new housing settlement and village expansion, offers a rare and transformative opportunity. It is a moment for the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Tobago House of Assembly to lead boldly by conceptualizing, designing, and constructing a community that is disability inclusive from its very foundation. Such an approach would align with contemporary planning standards and principles of equality, accessibility, and non-discrimination. Rather than retrofitting accessibility as a concession or an afterthought, this development can embed universal design principles into every road, every building, every public space, and every service. In doing so, it can become a national benchmark for what a truly modern, sustainable, and environmentally conscious community looks like. One that recognizes accessibility not as a special accommodation, but as a fundamental right and an essential component of equitable development. Likewise, the Trinidad and Tobago Revitalization Blueprint, launched in November 2025, presents a critical and timely policy opportunity to embed disability inclusion as a core pillar of national development. As the plan seeks to stimulate economic recovery, strengthen social infrastructure, and modernize public systems, it offers the government and relevant state agencies a strategic platform to ensure that accessibility and inclusion are integrated from the outset rather than appended as secondary considerations. By ensuring that accessibility is treated as a foundational planning principle, the government can demonstrate its commitment to building a modern, sustainable, and socially equitable Trinidad and Tobago, one in which no citizen is excluded from full participation in national progress. Disability inclusion is not charity. It is fairness, equity, and smart governance. Persons with disabilities must be enabled to participate fully and with dignity in national life. Now, we have seen encouraging progress made in education. The Ministry of Education reports that 45 primary and 13 secondary schools have now achieved at least 90% physical accessibility, including ramps, elevators, and tactile paving, and accessible washrooms. This enables many children with physical disabilities to attend mainstream schools with the support of teaching assistants, and these are meaningful steps. Yet, challenges remain. At institutions such as the Princess Elizabeth Home, there are bright, capable children whose attendance is inconsistent, often due to barriers outside of their control. For example, children with spina bifida have special care needs that are not always available and which may therefore affect school attendance. No child should lose educational opportunity because the systems around them are not sufficiently supportive. The Ministry of Education Student Support Services Division has recognized the link between learning disabilities, school dropouts, and delinquency. Inclusion, therefore, is also a matter of crime prevention and social stability. Mr. President, this motion is not about charity. It is about sound policy, fiscal responsibility, and national development. The Caribbean Development Bank has recognized that social exclusion undermines productivity and sustainable development. When we exclude persons with disabilities, we diminish not only their opportunities, but our collective potential. Disability can be minimized by our choices, by how we design our built environment, draft our laws, shape our attitudes, and set our priorities. Mr. President, this motion calls on us to move from good intentions to measurable action, to build systems that ensure that equal rights are matched by equitable access. Impairments will always exist. The question is not whether we can afford to invest in disability inclusion. The question is whether we can afford not to. I therefore urge the Senate to support the motion, to reaffirm our constitutional commitments, and to champion legislation and policy that promote equality, equity, affirmative action when necessary, and meaningful accountability. Mr. President, I deeply appreciate having been able to add my voice to this vital debate, and I thank you for the opportunity.
The Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for the opportunity to speak in this honorable chamber. Indeed, after 11 years as a member of parliament, it is my first opportunity to speak in this chamber, and I am extremely grateful. Mr. President, it also presents an opportunity for me to offer my congratulations to you on your elevation as the presiding officer of this august chamber, and I'm sure that with your tremendous experience and knowledge of parliamentary affairs, that this chamber would be better off. So I thank you for the opportunity. I'm very happy to join this debate to share a few thoughts on what is already a well-ventilated matter. I had the opportunity to peruse the records and examine the contributions that were made. I want to congratulate all who have contributed so far, but especially to commend the mover of this motion, Senator Lalit Etienne, for what I think is a very timely and important motion. And Senator Murray, I want to say that I intend to behave myself, because it appears that this is a chamber that you have to behave yourself, correct? Senator Roberts? Yeah. So I also want to thank my colleague in the lower house, the Minister of the People, Social Development and Family Services, for her contribution and a very detailed account of the work already done under her watch when she contributed in this chamber on the 26th of November, 2025, Senator. The Honourable Minister's contribution was remarkable in laying the groundwork for this government's policy framework for the delivery of social services to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. In looking at the Hansard record, I noted that Senator Etienne, in laying this motion, would have repeated what the Honorable Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, in her first term in 2010, when she addressed the United Nations and identified the need to respect the rights of persons with disabilities. The mover of this motion went on to state that the Honorable Prime Minister then has been championing the cause for a long time and continues to champion that cause. And Mr. President, I could not agree more that this has been setting the tone for what the government would want to do. So we on this side would want to give the population the assurance that we take the issue of disability very seriously. And part of the reason for that is because disability does not only impact on the affected person. Disability impacts on families, it impacts on communities, and by extension, it impacts on the entire society. My own experience in this area, Mr. President, besides the fact that I've been a medical practitioner for some 40 years, or I was a medical practitioner for the past 40 years, and the fact that I've been a sitting member of Parliament for the previous 10 years, where you encounter all manner of persons with disabilities and so on. But I just wanted to reflect that my own personal experience would have started when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and their mother, very worried that I would not make it, I wouldn't pass the common entrance in those days, was very worried, and took the precaution of sending me for maths lessons, because she thought I was very deficient in that area. She was worried about me. But the story, Senator Brown, is that the teacher was actually afflicted with polio, and therefore that would have been my first encounter, and I had to try to understand how this teacher, a few years older than me, afflicted with polio, was able to teach me mathematics. And of course, that emphasizes the points that have been made in this debate. My second encounter in terms of what governments can do in terms of accepting, acknowledging, and treating with disability occurred in 2019, a few years ago, when I had the opportunity as an opposition member of Parliament to attend a course in Beijing. And the hotel I was staying in to the conference center was about a 10-minute walk. And I was walking along the pavement in Beijing. And there was some, what I thought at the time, and I have to confess this, some very funny markings, on the pavement. And that is called tactile paving. Is that what you mentioned, Senator? So, of course, it shows that, some countries are very much ahead. And when I inquired, I was told that this tactile paving was really to allow persons with disabilities in terms of being able to see, visual disabilities, to be able to know where. So they created their own pathway on the pavement. And I thought that was quite remarkable. And of course, that is where we have to head to. So, Mr. President, disability is a complex and it is an often contested concept. During the debate and the other contributions, I know this issue may have come up already. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities describes disability as resulting from. So it says disability describes it as resulting from the interaction between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So this is important. This is UN 2006 Article 1. So, Mr. President, I believe this was referred to already by Senator Murray. You would have mentioned this. I think it's important enough to repeat this in this Honorable House and for the population as well. But I found this definition was useful because it separates impairment. For example, an impairment, you can be paraplegic, you can be polio afflicted, you can have vision loss, autism. So that's an impairment. But it separates that. It allows us to separate that from the barriers to participation. And what are these barriers to participation? You speak of discrimination, you speak of physical inaccessibility, and we speak of limited employment opportunities, amongst others. And many of these, in the motion have been already debated. I will not go into details on those. My intention is to just say a few words in terms of the health aspect as relates to disability. And of course, the motion, Mr. President, calls for a holistic package in a time frame, perhaps ambitious, some may say, but maybe that's the expectation of this government, that we can do it in 12 months, Senator Roberts. So, we give it a shot, we give it a try, we work on what's there already. But the point I wanted to make is that the package includes a plan, but it also speaks to legislation as being important. But whilst legislation is important, I want to make the point that cultural and attitudinal shifts are very important measures. We have many laws on the books of this country, good laws, but sometimes without the right attitude, without the right cultural thinking, those laws can come to naught, and in fact, they can defeat the very purpose for which they are, for which they have been passed. For example, if we speak about the laws against drinking and driving under the influence, it's there in the books. We can speak about driving without seatbelts. How many times do you see people still doing that? And of course, it irks me every time I see in this day and age that someone is driving with a cell phone, held to the ears. The point I'm making, of course, is that while the legislation is important, it is also important that we look at how we can change our attitudes and our culture, our cultural beliefs going forward, because that is what will be important as well. There's also the issue of physical inaccessibility. A lot has been said in this debate about that. So I took the opportunity of looking at the Ministry of Health first and see where we are. Because the Ministry of Health really should be leading the example, other ministries, of course. So I looked at what was happening in the Ministry of Health. And we have good news and bad news here. All persons have access to health facilities, inclusive of persons with disabilities. The good news is that all the new health facilities, the Arima Hospital, Point Fortin Hospital, the Couva Hospital, and the Central Block, which is coming on stream, are equipped with physical infrastructure capabilities, like ramps and handrails and washrooms and so on. But interestingly, in a survey in September 2024, an assessment of all buildings of the Ministry of Health was conducted. And there are some buildings that require wheelchair and or ramp access. And an inspection was done of 21 buildings. I'm not going to read all of these into the record, but quite a significant number of these, when the question was asked of whether there was provision of wheelchair and or ramp access, the answer was no. And of course, it is the intention of the government to look at these and to try to retrofit where possible. These are, of course, some of these are very old buildings. It may not be possible. But the point about it is that, if you have a facility where, patients, are coming for care, then those buildings need to be retrofitted. And of course, as part of the Trinidad and Tobago revitalization blueprint, which was mentioned in this debate, the new public infrastructure projects going forward will be required to meet modern accessibility standards for public spaces. So, Mr. President, the question really is, why is the Minister of Health getting involved in this debate? Because the motion itself doesn't speak of the word health. The word health is not mentioned in the motion. But I think it's sufficiently important for us to understand. And I wanted to make the point that going forward, it is the intention of myself and the government to bring to the cabinet something to speak of health in all policies. So I think it's important in all of the policies that are being generated by the government to have some aspect of health, and health in all policies regarding other things, of course. And now, at the forefront of this, I think, in addition to health in all policies, we have to look at, the disability aspect of it in terms of the policies that we go forward. And of course, a lot of this is based on data. The data is lacking. The number of just around 50,000 persons with disabilities has been mentioned. That is all data 2011. So of course, we await the results of the 2023 household survey to look at the numbers. But the estimates, if we were to look at over the last 10 to 12 years since those figures were published, might suggest a figure closer to 100,000. Some are saying somewhere 80 to 90,000. But again, that is what we need. What is perhaps important as well is the future projections. And projections from the IDB suggest that disability prevalence in Trinidad and Tobago and other Caribbean countries may rise over time due to factors like aging population and increasing chronic health conditions. So, for example, the projections indicate that by 2050, more than 1 in 5 people in the Caribbean nations, including Trinidad and Tobago, could have a disability. So that is worrisome news. And of course, there are some factors in that projection that are modifiable, especially in terms of the chronic health condition, the NCDs, and so on. Senator Brown, in his contribution, would have spoken about diabetes and the other NCDs. So it's a big problem. The global prevalence of this of disability is some 16% of the global population, speaks to about 1.3 billion people worldwide that suffer from some sort of disability. And of course, this trend, again, the global trend is increasing. Now, what are the health issues in terms of those who suffer with disabilities? It is known that many persons with disabilities face a higher risk of premature death, dying up to 20 years earlier than those without disabilities. There is evidence, of course, that if one were to, to improve the conditions, that perhaps the lifespan can be increased. Persons with disabilities have twice the risk of developing conditions such as depression, asthma, diabetes, stroke, and obesity. And Senator Murray, in your contribution on the last day, you would have spoken about mental health conditions, schizophrenia. I did read your contribution, Senator. So you mentioned that, and of course, it is also very high on the agenda of this government in the health sector, the whole issue of mental health. The mental health policy and program is soon again to come to the cabinet, and there is a plan in terms of rolling out mental health, in terms of moving away from institutions and more into the communities. So I thought it was important to share that with this chamber and with the population. So we spoke about those conditions. Persons with disabilities are 3 times more likely to be denied health care. This is an interesting finding. And 1.5 times more likely to delay or avoid essential medical care. So these are the communities that we have to reach out and we have to seek out in terms of making sure that the care is accessible. And the issue of equality as opposed to equity was mentioned in this debate already. And I have a very interesting document which I would want to share. In fact, now might be a good time to share this document. And it's a global report on health equity for persons with disabilities. And this is a WHO report from 2022, so it's fairly recent. There are some very interesting findings. I will not go into all of the details, Mr. President, but what this report does essentially on health equity for persons with disabilities, what it does, it analyzes the factors that contribute to systemic health inequities for persons with disabilities, and it outlines important policy and programmatic actions and recommendations to reduce these inequities. And on perusal of this document, I thought it was an appropriate time to perhaps look at including some of these recommendations from this document as we go forward. And I can say to this House here today that one of the recommendations here is to establish a committee or a focal point at the Ministry of Health for disability inclusion. So I want to make that commitment here that, at the Ministry of Health, we are going to establish a unit to look at disability for disability inclusion. I think that's important. And part of the reason for that is that that unit could serve, as we go forward in terms of liaison with the other ministries and other government policies. So that will bring the focus in terms of the health sector. I think it's important for us to look in that direction. So we spoke about the health inequities and the outcomes. A lot has been said about the grants and so on. I will not go into those details. Just to give the assurance to this chamber and to the population that the policy shift is going to be made from the charity-based model to a rights-based development model. In the debate, Senator Brown would have spoken about the charity-based model, and it is the intention of the government to shift from that charity-based model to a rights-based development model. A lot has been said about the employment opportunities and so on. Now, in terms of prevention, I think it's also important that we look at what the government is doing in terms of prevention. And just, a quick perusal of the health services that are the public health institutions in treating with persons with disabilities. There's a lot in place for screening at birth. All babies born in public institutions are examined medically before discharge so that you can diagnose, pick up congenital conditions which are associated with developmental problems and disability. And of course, this gives us a head start in terms of, trying to treat with these before they enter primary school, and even when they're in school that they already identified. The community health nurses that visit the government-assisted primary schools, special schools and private schools, that's important. And of course, we also have quite a bit in terms of the child development clinics. We have the pediatric clinics at the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. And at the Couva Hospital, there's quite a bit of emphasis on the outpatient clinics in terms of children with disabilities. And at this point in time, having been open for the last 2 months or so, I can say that we've already seen 241 patients at that hospital and outpatient clinics in areas such as pediatric neurology, pediatric nephrology, pediatric rheumatology, pediatric endocrinology, and child development clinics and so on. So there's quite a bit of work going on. Just a few words on the National Enrichment Center. When the Minister of the People, Social Development and Family Services spoke in this debate in November, the Minister gave a commitment in terms of the opening of the National Enrichment Center. I want to announce that that center has now been opened. It's been open since services commenced on February 2nd, 2026. And for the 3 weeks that the facility has been opened, a total number of patients seen, and these are figures that we have received this morning, 98 patients have been seen to date, and a variety of different areas, autism spectrum disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, learning difficulties, speech concerns. So again, that was a promise made, and now I can say a promise delivered by the UNC government. But of course, there are challenges, and it's important. We spoke about getting the data. It's also important to recognize the challenges. And one of the challenges that this country faces in the area of what we call therapeutic interventions, and I speak of areas such as physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, behavioral therapy, and psychological support. One of the issues we have here, Senator Brown, is the issue of a shortage of trained personnel in this area. Those are very, very important areas if we are going to be able to help those with disabilities, but there is a shortage. Now, just saying there is a shortage is not enough. I knew there was a shortage. So what did we do about it, Mr. President? We commissioned a human resource for health study across the RHAs, and I'm happy to say, well, I'm not sure I should say I'm happy to say, but I can say that the report is now available. The preliminary report is now available, and it does confirm a shortage of what we call allied health professionals. And the figure is, in terms of the vacancies, that the posts that are available at the RHAs, the numbers that we need to fill would be just over 1,000 persons. So what are we doing about this? Well, we have a lot of trained, qualified professionals, our nationals abroad. So what we have done is that at the cabinet, we've passed a national diaspora policy. So the intention is to give preference to our trained nationals who are willing and able to come back and serve us in this area. Amongst other areas, there is also the need for specialist nurses. There is a need for specialist doctors in certain areas. I don't think ophthalmology is one of those areas, Senator, but there are other areas, of course, that you know of which I speak. So that diaspora program is to encourage our nationals first to come back and serve. Many of them have indicated, and at the Ministry of Health, we are in the process of, creating a document that will, provide the opportunity for this to happen. The other thing that we need to do in terms of attracting and making the services of these professionals available to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago is changing the way in which they are engaged. These are highly skilled and trained professionals. The services are in high demand. The public sector at this point in time, Minister of Finance acting, or Minister of Planning, at no point in now or perhaps in foreseeable future will the public service be in a position to adequately compensate these professionals for the work they do. So what's the answer? The answer is that we have to look at how we engage them to make them available to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So these persons, of course, find it more lucrative to work in the private sector. One can't blame them for that. But of course, we have to look at how we engage them in the public sector in terms of on a sessional basis, so that all of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago benefit. So that's something that I'm looking at as Minister of Health. We're looking at in terms of how we engage these specialists. And I speak of just a selected number: occupational therapy, the speech and language pathologists, the behavioral therapy, and so on. So that's important going forward. So, Mr. President, I also wanted to mention another initiative which is important. And again, I refer to the disability created by some of the NCDs. For example, diabetes is a big, big issue in this country. And what we would have done is that the nation will recall that last year, around August, September, there was an artificial limb camp which was conducted at the NCIC Center in Central. And what was realized in preparing for that artificial limb camp is that there were some 1,000 persons in this country who were awaiting artificial limbs. The problem with that before is that by the previous arrangements, the Ministry of Social Development would have been able to provide just a small number of artificial limbs. So with that camp, we were able to provide limbs to 802 of those 1,000 persons. A remarkable achievement. Again, I would want to put it on the record. Our thanks to India, of course. This came on the visit of Prime Minister Modi and, of course, the cooperation of the Indian High Commissioner. So I think that's a big bite into the backlog. There still remains about 200 persons who require artificial limbs. They have not been forgotten. The intention of the government is to create a permanent artificial limb center in Pinal. That's happening right now. The materials are there, training is taking place, and as soon as that facility is launched, we will be able to take care of the backlog of those persons who would have going forward. What will happen, of course, is that there will come a time when the center, because we've taken such a big bite into the backlog, there'll be a time when there will also be the capacity in that center to provide for those who will require the service from outside of Trinidad and Tobago. So we are looking at that as providing a regional service at some point in time, and of course with the potential to even earn some foreign exchange in that regard. So going forward, that would be the intention of the government. But the population will hear a bit more about that as we go forward. We spoke about education. It's important for the population to know that the restart of the National Laptop Program includes specialized assistive software to ensure students with disabilities have equal tools for success in a technology-driven environment. So I thought that was important to share with honorable senators here. The issue, another initiative of this government, which would have some sort of impact in terms of treating with those with disability and even the ordinary citizen, would be the legislation that was passed by this government in terms of reducing and treating with noise in the environment regarding the fireworks and the noise pollution. Because of course, for the ordinary citizen, Senator Cummings, it's very difficult in the air sometimes. Can you imagine what it would be like for someone who has some sort of disability? So we are hoping that that sort of legislation and forward thinking by the government will assist in that regard. Mr. President, it would be remiss of me if I did not speak a little bit about the Princess Elizabeth Center. I know that has been raised in the debate by yourself, Senator Brown, Senator Murray spoke about it. But of course, just to put it on the record, that this center is funded by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Health. It continues to provide a very valuable service. I had the privilege to visit that center as Minister of Health just a couple of months ago and was quite impressed by the quality and the kind of work that was done. And it remains a very important resource for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Treats both children and adolescents with physical and mobility problems. And for the benefit of the population, the treatment will include a range of physical disabilities such as clubfoot, cerebral palsy, scoliosis, and the care here is, of course, received free at the point of delivery, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, the wheelchairs, the walkers, and mobility aids, and so on. This center operates 2 walking clinics per week with about 50 to 70 clients or children seen at each clinic, and performs over 150 surgical operations each year. And of course, I would want to put on the record the gratitude of the people of Trinidad and Tobago to Dr. David Toby and his team there, who have performed remarkably well over the years. So, Mr. President, as I close, again, I would want to say that, that this government is not working in silos. I know some would have raised that issue of silos. We are certainly not working in silos. We are working as a team. The cabinet has established clusters with different ministries so that the ministries will know what we are doing. And in fact, there's already established, way back in July of 2025, there would have been a partnership between the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development and the Ministry of Health to look at how we treat with the dengue threat last year, because we realized that, there was a bit of overlap between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Local Government in terms of treating with the mosquitoes and so on. So that partnership took place. That was the first example. And of course, recently, the population would have seen a partnership between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health in terms of rolling out what we call the healthy nutrition guidelines in schools. Again, this is a measure which is intended to address childhood obesity, a big problem. We'll not speak about that today. Another initiative here would have been, of course, the partnership between the Ministry of the People Social Development, Family Services, and Ministry of Health, and that allowed us to open the National Enrichment Center, and that is now functioning. Work in progress, work done. And of course, to come would be another partnership that speaks to what we are talking about here, and that would be between the Ministry of Agriculture, Education and Health, where it is the intention of the government to review the nutritional standards of the meals provided by the school feeding program. It's very important that we look at what we are providing for the children as we try to address the whole issue of childhood obesity. I did mention, of course, that the health in all policies is to come, and of course that again to focus that it would be my intention as Minister of Health to ensure that somewhere in the legislation that health has its place, and of course disability has its place. Last but not least, I want to close on a point which creates a bit of problem in terms of the assessment for disability. So we have all these grants and so on available, provided by the state. But there is a disability form which has to be filled out. You might be familiar with the form, my medical colleagues here, in terms of trying to quantify the percentage of disability. And that form asks the doctor in the health center or the clinic or wherever to say whether disability is 10% or 50% or 70% or 80%. I've been practicing for 40 years. I don't know how you can come up with that. It's difficult sometimes. So right now in progress is a review of that particular form in terms of trying to make the form easier and perhaps a more accurate way. Because the reason I'm making this point is that, and some of my colleagues who have been members of Parliament as well before, would often have your constituents come and say, listen, my form has been denied, or my grant has been denied because the doctor couldn't say how much disability. And of course, when we go back to what we defined as disability, not only the impairment, but of course the conditions under which these citizens might be living, sometimes that could make the difference between, getting the grant and not getting the grant. And I think that in this way, the doctors who are filling out the forms have to be assisted in that regard, and the assistance has to come in terms of the review of the form. So together with the Minister of the People's Social Development and Family Services, I've given the undertaking that we will review that form, and hopefully we'll have a new form in the very near future to make it a more fair and accurate and equitable distribution. So, Mr. President, with those few words, I again want to thank you for the opportunity and the privilege to speak in this August chamber. I want to close by commending again Senator Etienne for bringing this motion, and I would certainly say that the government would have no problem in terms of supporting such a motion. I thank you so much.
Senator Foster Cummings.
Mr. President, I want to take the opportunity to thank you for the contribution that I'm about to make in this debate on this motion. And at the onset, I want to acknowledge the excellent work done by the mover of the motion, Senator Etienne, who I listened to attentively in her unique style of presentation. And I noticed that most of our colleagues did the same. It really is a very well thought out motion and very deserving of the support of the members of this House. But before I continue, Mr. President, I have to take the opportunity, because it was quite refreshing to listen to the presentation coming from the Minister of Health this evening. And it's not often that I get the opportunity to, as a member of the opposition, to say that to the government, but clearly the Minister of Health is about the people's business. He mentioned, and I won't refer to all of the points he made, but certainly to one or two, the government's position on moving from a charity-based to the rights-based model. And as well, I want to take note of the program executed for the artificial limb replacement, which I think is very commendable. And he did mention the question of a shortage of allied health professionals. Now, I recall, Mr. President, that in my previous assignment as Minister of Youth Development and National Service, that we did some work with the regional health authorities and identified that there was a shortage in that area. And as a result, we instituted a program in collaboration with COSTAT to train annually, I think it was about 80 to 100 young people in that field. I'm not sure where that program is now. I do know that the first cohort may have been due for graduation sometime this year. And it's my expectation that the government will look at that program as one that is of significant benefit and worth continuing for the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. But, Mr. President, the mover of the motion is someone who, from the time she entered the Senate, I took pause and, I said, this takes a citizen of a certain caliber to enter the Senate and to demonstrate to Trinidad and Tobago that notwithstanding whatever challenges she had, she was prepared to give of her best and make her contributions to the legislature in Trinidad. And when she moved the motion, she regaled us with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which I'll repeat. The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. And that is something that as legislators, we always have to take note of, because it is pretty much the voice of the voiceless. Those who are unable to be present in this august place, at least will have on their side persons who will speak on their behalf. And in discussing a matter like this, treating with disabilities, it's a good opportunity that the person moving the motion is one who has lived experience. All of us, as much as we support this motion, we do not have the experience of Senator Etienne. And, Mr. President, as Senator Etienne went on in her contribution, I took note of two or three other points. She referenced the increase in disabilities globally as a result of work of the World Health Organization, and referenced that and a connection to chronic non-communicable diseases and aging population. She was speaking about the increase in disabilities. And whilst later on in the presentation, she spoke to the fact that our last CSO report was sometime in 2011, and so could not give an exact number outside of the number given then, which I think was around 40,000 or thereabouts. She made the point that clearly, based on our own circumstances of an increase in non-communicable diseases in particular, that she was convinced that the number was much higher. And therefore, Mr. President, it brings a higher level of importance to the conversation that we have a larger percentage of our citizens who require us as a legislature to look at putting in place systems for them to contribute towards the economic development of this country, and as well to make sure that those barriers that have been in place for some time, that we take steps to remove those barriers. We were told that our partners in Jamaica, St. Lucia, Guyana, Bahamas, and other countries in the Caribbean are a step ahead of us, and therefore it places us in a situation where usually we are the leaders in the Caribbean in most areas, that we should put some additional attention in making sure that we support this motion in the first instance, but also to put in place the requisite support as outlined by the mover of the motion. And so, Mr. President, I want to acknowledge those persons, those citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and their families, the persons living with disabilities, caregivers, advocates, representatives of various organizations who have the lived experiences and who have kept this matter on the front burner for a very long time, even before it appeared on this order paper and this motion moved by the goodly senator. It concerns whether persons with disabilities in Trinidad and Tobago are able to enjoy equal citizenship and on practical and meaningful terms. Mr. President, I had an experience some years ago visiting the community of Maloney, a community which is an agency development and consists of, yes, some single unit houses, flat story, and as well some 3-story high-rise buildings. And whilst moving through the community, I noticed some young men lifting a resident to take her up these 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, which was on the 3rd floor. And I asked some questions about the situation. And it turns out that this resident, of course, did not always have that handicap, lived on the 3rd floor, and eventually, for some reason or the other, had a disability, and thereafter required the assistance of her neighbors to be able to move downstairs, to go out to do whatever she had to do, or to get back to her home. I did at the time raise the issue with the Housing Development Corporation, pleading with them to make available a ground floor unit for this resident. But as I relate this story, it must be that there might be other citizens experiencing similar challenges. Now, as I peruse the contribution of Senator Alexander, Minister Alexander, he indicated that the Ministry of Housing, in addition to implementing in their new construction program infrastructure to deal with the concern I just expressed and others, that they will also look at retrofitting some of the existing infrastructure. A motion like this, Mr. President, non-confrontational, so far in the main. It's difficult in a motion like this for the usual shouting and jabs and personal insults to take root. I would hope that that sees its way throughout the debate, because there must be matters on which some bipartisan discussion can take place, and it's not so much about who did what, who didn't do, who should have done. There has been work done over the years by successive governments to make sure that we put things in place to improve the circumstances. And what the motion now calls on us to do is to improve, to take a step further, and to make sure that legislation comes to the Parliament to give those rights to those citizens who require us to do what we have been, some of us elected, some of us appointed to do. It concerns whether the state's legal and policy framework is adequate to address the barriers that remain widespread, persistent, and in many cases preventable. Sometimes it just takes a little more effort. Sometimes it takes a little more collaboration. Sometimes it takes a level of empathy. But as a responsible legislature, we have to take the step forward. It concerns the standard of public governance, as inclusion is not achieved through statements of intent alone. It requires coherent systems, Mr. President, enforceable standards, interinstitutional coordination, and sustained accountability. I mean, before somebody spoke about the laws, Mr. President, and implementation of laws, I know that as a government, we did put in place regulations governing the public parking spaces for persons with disabilities. But how is that policed? And do we still have citizens who will not take into consideration the inconvenience caused by them parking, well, not simply, but parking a space designated for someone with a disability? And when that person has to take advantage of such a space, it is occupied by someone who should not be there. These policies cannot be approached only through welfare lens. Welfare measures may be part of the response, but they are certainly not the whole response. If the issue is framed only in terms of assistance, we risk treating persons with disabilities as beneficiaries of occasional support rather than as citizens entitled to equal access and equal protection. There's so much we notice that has changed over time in terms of citizens' respect and approach and support for persons with disabilities. In traveling across to what we would call the developed world, we would see that in terms of public transportation, for instance, Mr. President, the level of advancement that is in place for persons with disabilities, in particular with public transportation, the bus, the subway, etc. And it is an area that we certainly have to do much more with where public transportation is in place. Accessibility to buses, arrangements that would give ease of access to even taxi cabs. And therefore, it is something that the government need to take note of. The correct frame is rights, inclusion, and state obligation. That means the central question is not only whether some programs exist, but rather whether the state has created a legal and institutional framework that removes barriers and enables persons with disabilities to participate fully in social and economic life. And that is at the core of the conversation and the motion moved by Senator Etienne. Inclusion in the social and economic life of the country by persons living with disabilities. And Senator Etienne went on to emphasize the importance of legislative reform and a structured national response rather than reliance on fragmented interventions over time. Mr. President, as I stated earlier, I certainly, and we on this side, certainly support this motion. We support the call made for a comprehensive national strategic plan. We support the call for modern legislative framework. We support the principle that disability inclusion must be treated as a matter of rights, equality, and public policy, and not simply as discretionary goodwill. And therefore, I welcome the position, as I said earlier, advanced by the minister who spoke earlier. Mr. President, at the same time, support for the motion does not require anyone to deny that efforts have been made in the past. In fact, the more credible position is to acknowledge that work has been undertaken across administrations. Dr. Brown, in his presentation, took the time to give us, let me not put it that way, took the time to give us information in relation to the work of the former government, while also recognizing that the progress made to date must be consolidated, strengthened, improved, and carried further. Mr. President, the duty before us now is to confront the gaps that remain to improve the legislative and policy position. That is the approach that we propose. It is fair to acknowledge that some initiatives, policy, work, and measures that have existed require improvement. It is also fair to acknowledge the progress where it has occurred, and I did that earlier, particularly in relation to some of the comments made by Minister of Health. We did get some examples from the Minister of the People when she was here of some of the initiatives that they intend to execute, and we look forward to seeing whether that is actually put in place. I don't have all the details in relation to what the services that the Empowerment Center provides at Chase Village, but it is something that we take note of and we'll pay some additional attention to. It is important to note and to make the point, Mr. President, that this motion must discuss as well the programs, the grants, the consultation, the administrative initiatives. And while these are all useful, it does not amount to the comprehensive framework that is required and that the motion speaks to. These do not by themselves create enforceable standards. They do not by themselves guarantee implementation across ministries. I was glad when the minister indicated that they are working not in silos, but that they are, what he referred to them as groupings of ministries, collaborating clusters. Thank you, Senator. Clusters of ministries collaborating and working together to make sure that you reduce the question of overlapping and duplication. Clusters, he said, clusters, yes, clusters. And making sure that you avoid duplication and overlapping and delay in implementation, etc. But who, for instance, is responsible or should be responsible in the implementation of access points to, let's say, police stations or health centers or these public buildings? I'm sure Senator Ratiram, who is from Couva, could tell you that the police station at Couva, I don't think has a ramp to access for the disabled. And therefore, some collaboration has to take place among the government ministries to make sure that there are some quick wins. That whilst we work on putting in place, because the motion calls for this legislation to come to Parliament within 12 months or so, but while we work on putting those things in place, there are some quick wins that can be implemented to make life a bit easier for persons living with disability. And therefore, it brings us to the question of the system-based approach, which begins by recognizing that these barriers are not incidental, they are structural. And during the debate, it has been referred to in several categories of barriers have been referred to, including attitudinal, institutional, structural barriers. And therefore, that is the framing of the conversation, Mr. President. It reflects the lived experience of persons with disability more accurately than a narrow focus on isolated hardship. And therefore, let us consider this as a practical approach to the discussion regarding this issue. Mr. President, a presenter before me spoke about the impact on education and the educational environment. It is an area that we have a lot of work to do in addressing how do we, at a very early stage in the educational process, provide the support required for assessment of young students who might have challenges, hearing difficulties, visually impaired. You know, gone are the days when the teacher will ask you a question in the class, you're probably not hearing the question, but you receive some support from a tambron or go of a whip. Or Senator Rashid, you will not know about that because by your time that had been abolished. But the whip or the ruler, Senator Arts, in those days. I know that you lecture at the university. I know you lectured at the university so that you would not have had you may not have been called upon to discipline students in that way. And neither the Attorney General who taught for many years at the law school. I don't think that applied at the law school, at the university as well. Okay. A citizen might be entitled to a public service, Mr. President, and I want to spend a little more time on the educational aspect. We still do not have, I'll go on to that point I just raised after the educational point. We still do not have the support for the assessment. A colleague was saying to me earlier that in terms of support for students facing disabilities, that where the support is not available in the public sector, in the private sector, it costs about $500 per session. And that one would require at least about 2 or 3 sessions a week to have any meaningful assessment and support. And therefore, it requires the state to step in and give more support in that area, particularly in the area of special needs assessment and teachers trained in special needs, or whether it is special needs schools in particular, is an area that requires some significant support. I went on to speak about the question of services in the public sector that citizens are entitled to, and because of lack of support or lack of facilities, they are unable to access them. And this will include the judicial system, courthouses, police stations, health centers, hospitals, schools, you name it. Unless the infrastructure is put in place, the technology is implemented, then there will be citizens who simply because of their disability, they cannot access these facilities. Their communication barriers will make it difficult, and in some cases might even be impossible unless they have the support of family members or an efficient caregiver to assist them and to take them to access these services. So persons may have the legal right in principle, but the absence of clear standards and practical enforcement leaves those rights ineffective in terms of their daily life. Furthermore, Mr. President, one of the strongest features discussed during the debate focuses on these very barriers, and I did indicate before that transportation and access to transportation is one of the main areas. And that indicates to us why the ad hoc programs are not enough. Without a framework, accessibility becomes uneven and dependent on project timing rather than public standards. Communication access is equally important, Mr. President. Digital accessibility, including the extent to which government websites and online systems are designed to be accessible and functional for persons using assistive technologies. This is because in the modern state, digital exclusion can be as limiting as physical exclusion. There's almost everything now that requires some access to some digital device. Many of the services of the government, licensing office, passport office, you name it, to apply for some of the very grants that some of these persons living with disabilities require for additional support, require some sort of online activity. And therefore, Mr. President, it is an area that we must place significant support on. Care systems, support services, Mr. President, service gaps. I referred to the therapist shortages earlier. These continue to be concerns for citizens living with disabilities. Mr. President, these issues are significant because they show that inclusion is not only about infrastructural access. It is also about quality, availability, and coordination of public services. And then we come to the question of employment. I know a previous speaker spoke about that, so I will not spend much time on it, but the fact remains, Mr. President, that there are persons who have struggled through, gone through. Clearly, they have to put much more effort into the question of their education and upskilling than persons living without disabilities. And having done that, access to jobs proves difficult because of the lack of structure and infrastructure in place. And therefore, that leaves a section of our workforce outside of the productive sector, unable to practice the trade that they have learned. Somebody spoke about, I think it was Senator Murray, some of the areas that some persons can be easily employed in and possibly worked off-site. Work from home arrangements even can be one of the considerations. I myself had an experience of working along with someone who had some disability challenges, and Mr. President, I can tell you that the work ethic is of a superior standard. The effort and the energy put into wanting, not only wanting, but getting the work done is certainly of a superior standard, notwithstanding the challenges. I don't know if it's something about knowing that you have a challenge in one area that somehow gives you a boost to perform at a higher level, but it was certainly very commendable. And so, Mr. President, as I said earlier, we support the comprehensive national strategic plan with clear accountability. The motion is correct to call for such a plan, and therefore it cannot be just a broad statement of intentions. It must assign responsibility, define priorities, establish timelines, and identify measurable incomes. And so, in winding up, Mr. President, we look forward to hearing from the government the timeline, in addition to the support for this motion, this very commendable motion brought by Senator Etienne, the timeline for the introduction of these legislative measures that would give to citizens of this country living with disability the hope that we are going to give them the equality of treatment that they deserve. I thank you, Mr. President.
Francis Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to lend my full and considered support for this motion brought by my independent colleague. This is not simply a symbolic motion on abstract social aspiration. In thinking about it, there are three legs on which I would like to rest my presentation, because this is a constitutional matter, I believe, it is an economic matter, and it's a governance matter. And I also propose to address those, as far as I could ascertain, concerns, doubts, difficulties that some may have in anticipating this motion and the actions arising from it. It was interesting, and I won't spend a lot of time on this because others have. It starts with, as I started my preparations, how does one think about disability? And it would appear that there are four models that have been prevalent over the last 100 years. One is a charity-based model, often based on morality, sometimes on pity. There's a medical model. Something is wrong with the person, and we need to fix them. The third, more recent, is a social model that says there's nothing wrong with the person. It's about how the society is responding to the persons with a range of ways in which they need to engage with their environment. And the last on which I would like to dwell is the human rights model, which really is speaking to what are the rights of our citizens in this context. So in looking at that and anchoring this presentation, starting with Section 4, as others have identified, of the Constitution, it guarantees equality before the law, equality of treatment from any public authority, the enjoyment of property, and the freedom of movement. These rights are not conditional. They are not subject to convenience. They are not suspended because of budget cycles. Additionally, a citizen cannot enter a public building because there's no ramp. How does a job applicant deal with exclusion because accommodation is deemed inconvenient? Or when a student with capability cannot access material in accessible formats that they would require? Or, as others have mentioned, where public transportation is physically inaccessible. These constitutional guarantees then become theoretical. Further, we have our Equal Opportunity Act, Chapter 22, which expressly prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability and imposes a duty on public and other authorities. Yet, the lived reality suggests that while the legal framework exists, implementation remains fragmented and inconsistent. Mr. President, rights without operational structures are rights in suspension. The motion does not ask for new rights. What it asks for is a coordinated national framework to operationalize the rights already guaranteed. And to those who may have expressed concerns, and I try to consult fairly widely, this is not a plea for sympathy. This is not a call for charity. It is a constitutional obligation that we in this Senate are living up to. And I'm very heartened by the contributions that I've heard from colleagues. Mr. President, disability inclusion is often discussed in moral terms. But it can also be possible to discuss it in economic terms. Others have pointed to the World Health Organization estimating approximately 50% of global population living with some form of disability, If our population is similar to the global population, that's putting it at about 225,000 persons in a 1.5 million, roughly, population. Even if one uses conservative census reporting, as others have indicated, including the esteemed Minister of Health, the number remains very significant. And while we may count the number of persons with disabilities, depending on how we define a disability, what we also need to count are the families affected. There's an absolutely lovely young lady. She's Down syndrome, now in her 30s, very active, plays pan, works in a bank, does all kinds of stuff. But her extended family are parents and 2 brothers, and the impact on the family, beyond simply counting the person, I think is something that can get lost as we discuss statistics. So in all of this, what we're asking for is how does one move forward so that disability inclusion is not only a constitutional and human right, but it's also an economic development issue. A person with disabilities who cannot access in education, human capital is suppressed. If they cannot access employment, productivity is lost. Household income declines. State dependency increases. When infrastructure is inaccessible, the very investment that the state makes yields a reduced return. Playing it forward, early action is fundamentally cost-effective. Exclusion, on the other hand, carries a fiscal and social cost. In small developing societies like ours, we can't afford to underutilize any segment of our population. Our economy, a modern economy, depends on maximizing participation and not tolerating structural exclusion. The motion therefore aligns very clearly with, and this is a much overused word, but it's necessary to use it here, economic diversification, workforce participation and expansion, ultimately influencing and impacting positively poverty reduction and social stability. But most precious of all, the measure is not a measure about costs, though we can estimate that, but it's about value creation. This country has been for a long period of time about opportunity creation and helping those who can do for themselves to do better, and therefore participate more fully in national life. The third leg that I would like to address is a governance approach to this plan. And just touching on 3 aspects of it. One is education and human capital. If it's one thing that has been consistent over much of the life of our republic, is a fundamental faith of the value of education, both in its own right, but also as an engine of mobility. Governments come, governments go. We may change how one implements that. But if there is a value system running across the entire population of Trinidad and Tobago, stretching way back into our grandparents, it is education counts. And governments have listened to that. It's reflected in our national budget in terms of what we spend. Yet inclusive education remains uneven, whether it is teachers needing and often wanting specialized training. Assistive technologies are not universally available. Some progress has been made, but so much more needs to be done. Tertiary education institutions often rely on ad hoc accommodations rather than on systemic planning. And as we look, and I won't dwell unduly on this, as we look across to the Caribbean community, just 2 examples. Barbados, the government has implemented a national disabilities unit and integrated disabilities policy into national development planning frameworks. And it was heartening to hear the Minister of Health speak about the establishment of that unit. Previously, the Minister who of social services who spoke earlier had spoken of their unit, and I'd be fascinated with how that effort gets integrated with other units that I'm sure that can be established. In Jamaica, their Disabilities Act of 2014 established a structured legal and regulatory regime, including standards for accessibility and a disabilities rights tribunal. In other words, there's much we could learn, and in learning, establish a leadership because it benefits the entire Caribbean community. And what is of note is that these countries are not wealthier than Trinidad and Tobago. They are very similar and face quite remarkable fiscal constraints. What distinguishes them is structured planning. That is good governance. When we look at infrastructure and public access, accessibility is not simply about ramps, it's about universal design. In chatting with some persons, and I'm asking, what would you like to see? And a person who is wheelchair bound said, can we have a standard that says light switches can be a little lower so I could reach them? Now, the interesting thing with that, not being constrained in that way, it hadn't occurred to me. It doesn't cost more. But a national standard in terms of accessibility of a light switch somehow seems to be a no-brainer. How we will implement it in new buildings going forward should make life easier. But accessibility is not merely about ramps, it's about universal design. It's about sidewalks and drainage and building codes and public signage and digital platforms and emergency systems and transportation fleets. If new buildings are constructed without universal design standards, not embedded at inception, then retrofitting becomes exponentially more expensive. And that's not prudent fiscal planning. Our Constitution in Section 4 guarantees equality before the law, and equality of treatment and equality of freedom of movement, these are not aspirational ideals, they're enforceable rights. They're not isolated inconveniences when people cannot have access. They form a broader web of structural exclusion. When public buildings are inaccessible, when public information is unavailable in accessible formats, when transportation systems exclude, when employment systems quietly screen out persons with disabilities, we are not facing unfortunate circumstances. What we're facing is a systemic non-compliance with our very own Constitution. Comprehensive national strategies would therefore work with establishing binding accessibility standards and mandating compliance timelines, integrating accessibility into procurement processes, and reducing, we would hope, future capital inefficiencies given the standards that people would comply with. That is good governance. And if we think about what has often been spoken about, and I think people are very much looking forward to this, the continuation of digital transformation and the inclusion that that can give. So as the government advances digital transformation initiatives, accessibility must be embedded in the very architecture of digital platforms. Global web content accessibility guidelines are standard practice in many modern states. If public portals are not accessible to screen readers, or if forms are not usable by persons with visual or motor impairment, we are digitizing exclusion. A national framework would therefore ensure that digital transformation does not widen inequality. That is good governance. So I think the support for this motion is about constitutional rights. There are economic imperatives and benefits from it, but there's also good governance that supporting this motion and the action it encourages in terms of a national strategic plan would encourage. But in considering anything like this, there will be doubts, concerns, and one can anticipate perhaps certain responses. So I thought it would be useful to just address some of these. The first is fiscal constraints. It can be argued quite cogently that our country faces budgetary restrictions. My response to that is that this motion does not demand immediate universal retrofitting. It simply is calling for a strategic plan within 12 months. The plan enables phased implementation. It allows the introduction and the setting of priorities. And I expect that that can be a fraught process, but in doing that, it gives a way forward. It allows for cost modeling. Failing to plan does not eliminate costs. It merely defers and very frequently compounds them. Furthermore, inclusive employment reduces long-term social assistance burdens and, one would hope, increases tax contribution. In other words, inclusion is fiscally responsive. There are some who will argue that the existing legislative framework is sufficient. And it may be said that the Equal Opportunity Act already provides remedies. But legislation without implementation and the implementation architecture is incomplete. We currently do not have accessibility standards embedded across ministries and our building codes, annual compliance reporting mechanisms, coordinated ministerial oversights, and a unified data collection system. Fragmentation undermines effectiveness and it increases cost. There are some who would raise a question about administrative capacity concerns. My goodness, look at all that governments and government ministries and departments have to do. It may be suggested that there are capacity constraints within ministries which limit rapid change. And I would argue that that's exactly why a structured plan can be useful, so that you could know what you're doing first, second, third, and everybody would wish that you could finish yesterday. But at least you have a projection of where you would want to go. That's good governance. A national framework would assign, and this has been raised by a couple persons here, who has lead responsibility? What are the defined timelines? What would be the measurable targets, which themselves will evolve and change? And how do we introduce monitoring and evaluation protocols? The capacity improves when roles and priorities are clarified, which is what this motion is calling for. When we look at economic inclusion as a national strategy, disability inclusion must be aligned to economic diversification, labor force participation and expansion, small business development, or SME development, skilled upgrading, and national competitiveness. An inclusive labor market signals maturity to investors. And when I talk about investors, I'm not talking foreign. I mean, that's nice. If other people from outside of Trinidad and Tobago look at us and they are pleased, or they say they're pleased with what we do, well, it's gratifying to get the compliments of others. But we do this for ourselves. We do this for our people, for our investors. And what that does is that it really does multiply the investments made. A comprehensive disability framework strengthens Trinidad and Tobago, whether it's international profile or whether it is how we see ourselves. Some have spoken on housing and urban planning. There is a plan, it was shared with me, for increasing accessibility. It was done well over 10 years ago in the city of Port of Spain. It was commissioned, it was developed, it was debated, it was discussed. I'm not quite sure who received it, but that's where it ended. All it indicates is much work has been done, much work still remains to be done. So as we look forward, what we're looking forward is how to be not narrow, but to be holistic, which is what a strategic planning process can help address. And when we look, and many people have mentioned it, and certainly to the professionals in the field, when I discussed it with them, They all lament the lack of effective data. Even the data we have, even if it is old, doesn't get granular enough for planning. We cannot manage what we cannot measure, or we cannot manage it effectively. A national disabilities register, compliant with privacy standards, will allow evidence-based policy formulations. And the labour force surveys that are done must capture disability disaggregated data. Education systems must track inclusiveness of education outcomes, not just activities. Without data, policy remains speculative rather than focused. And ultimately, Mr. President, it is about dignity and national aspiration. A citizen who cannot independently enter an office, government or otherwise, is not merely inconvenienced, but they suffer diminished dignity. And dignity is not theoretical, it is operational. Freedom of movement is meaningless without physical accessibility. Equality before the law is hollow without equal access to its institutions, whether that's access informationally or access physically. And we must ask ourselves if we are comfortable with the rights that exist in text, but not in texture. You know, I ask myself, as we sit here in this chamber, under our country's coat of arms, centrally and prominently placed above the head of our President of the Senate, and consider our national motto of together we aspire, together we achieve, what do we want it to mean in the context of this motion? This motion does not impose immediate statutory changes. It does not try to prescribe inflexible mandates. Its only timeline is come up with a plan in 12 months. And that plan itself will morph, change, evolve, I have no doubt, as one works the plan. But it says, longest journey starts with a first step. It calls on our government to table a comprehensive national strategic plan, inclusive of a legislative framework, and the goal is to eliminate, as best as one can, barriers to social and economic exclusion. The motion, I think, wisely calls for a comprehensive national strategy inclusive of that legislative framework. And it suggests that that is part of the missing architecture as we discuss and deal with disabilities. What the motion is proposing is measurable, it is achievable, and it is responsible. When I looked at this, if ever there was a motion that, and several have described it, is cross-partisan. In the research I came across, it was, I think, 2015, that a UNC government ratified the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, accepting that international framework and committing the country to moving forward, recognizing those duties and obligations. And in 2019, an entirely different government, politically, revised the national policy for persons with disabilities, drawing on that 2015 ratification. That is bipartisanship, because disabilities cut across every constituency, every ethnicity, every income bracket. It affects children, it affects old people, it affects working families. And I would dare say in this House, there are probably each person sitting in this House, Mr. President, knows one or two or three or several families, some close, some more distant, that are dealing with disabilities. And it is our constitutional duty, where we can, to help that move forward. Many have spoken, on that I should say it's not a partisan issue, but it is a national maturity test. This is not an expenditure, it is an investment in the future and in ourselves. And as I was thinking of how I would wrap up a presentation such as this, I thought it might be useful to look at not simply what needs to be done, but to take heart and to take spirit from what has been done in the past. I did a quick count, Mr. President, of members in the House. I hope my count is not terribly inaccurate, but of the 30 members or 31 members of the Senate, I include yourself, Mr. President, there are 15 people wearing glasses. Now, I don't know who's wearing contacts, right? And there was a time where to be sight impaired it set you apart. In today's world, we simply accept that if you need vision correction, and we move on from there. There's no issue in it. When I talk to people with disabilities, they say, listen, they were looking for you just to be part of the whole. There was a time, and some of us older would remember this, where to be left-handed, you get licks and forced to write and to try and make your right-handed dominant, and when in fact left was your dominant hand. My mother, single parent, made our sleep clothes, our work clothes. She sewed. It was an economic measure. And she's left-handed. The difference between her finding a scissors and one day finding a left-hand scissors was remarkable. It never occurred to me, I'm right-handed, that it could make such a difference. Finding a technician to turn the light on her sewing machine, because it's set up for 90% of the population is right-handed, it's set up for right-handed people, to swivel it was a big deal. Now, eventually it got done, and it made such a difference. So when we talk about inclusion, it is often the small things. Today, the idea of punishing a child for using their left hand would be an aberration. We would recoil with that with disgust. But our society was once there. I'm not judging, it simply was. And there's a last element I want to point to, and I hope I get this right, because it's going into an area that could be fraught. There was once a time in our country where this Senate, or the House that represented the population, would have predominantly male persons. Today, we take it as unacceptable that those who hold up half the sky, as a Chinese leader once described it, would not be included in national life. There was a time where people would look and say, what am I doing here? And that was exclusionary. Today, it's kind of like, we don't think about it. So when we think about attitudinal change, all I want to point to is how our society has in fact changed. That more change is needed, that it is an incomplete task, that a lot more perhaps needs to be done. But I think we sometimes criticize and criticize ourselves without also recognizing progress that has been made. I've tried in this presentation to be reasoned and reasonable. And we will see when the vote is taken if I was persuasive. So my last argument has to do with speaking to each person here. Why is this legislation important? Why is this planning important? Because each of you, each of us, are one accident away from a potential disability. And quite frankly, may we all have long lives, but as we get older, the potential of the need for assistive technologies will increase. So if only in our own self-interest, it's a pretty poor argument. But if that is the argument, let us support this motion. So, Mr. President, in conclusion, a modern republic does not simply declare equality. It designs for equality. It does not merely prohibit discrimination. it structures inclusion. It doesn't wait for litigation, it plans proactively. This motion is asking us to move from promise to plan, from aspiration to architecture, from rights in theory to rights in practice. As others have noted, a society is not judged by how it treats the normal, whatever that may be defined as, but how it removes obstacles for those that have been historically marginalized. If our nation removes barriers, it unleashes potential. I therefore unequivocally support this motion and urge this Honourable Senate, my fellow legislators, to do likewise. Thank you, Mr. President.
The Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of the People, Social Development and Family Services.
Mr. President, good afternoon. I thank you for allowing me to rise to contribute as the Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of the People, Social Development and Family Services to this motion that is particularly of interest to us. I am proud to be able to stand to expand on the information given at the last discussion by my line minister, the Honourable Minister Mohit, in November. This government continues to demonstrate its strong commitment to improving the welfare of persons with disabilities through significant and sustained investment and financial assistance programs and initiatives administered by our ministry in efforts such as the disability grants for adults, the disability grants for minors, both of which provide essential income and support for vulnerable persons who are medically certified as being permanently disabled and unable to gain employment. Adults currently receive monthly $2,000, while children under the age of 18 receive $1,500 per month, paid to a parent or an authorized child caregiver. These grants form critical pillars in our national social protection system, ensuring that persons with disabilities are provided the opportunity to have access to basic needs, care, and support. Since coming into office, Mr. President, we have made significant investment in the disability assistance grants for both adults and minors. For fiscal 2025, 21,000 plus adults benefited from this grant at a total of over $500 million, while over 4,000 minors received support, totaling over $80 million. Collectively, these grants accounted for a total expenditure by our ministry of over $600,000. Taking into account the Honourable Minister of Health's contribution to review medical certificates used to apply for these disability grants, our ministry continues to anticipate increased demands and remains proactive. Therefore, for fiscal 26, we have allocated $640 million in expenditure for our disability grants program. This allocation signals the government's sustained commitment to strengthening national social protection systems, ensuring that persons with disabilities will continue to receive the required assistance to enhance their standards of living, participate meaningfully in society, and benefit from equitable treatment across all spheres of national development. Additionally, other grants that our ministry provides under the General Assistance Grants portfolio are available to persons with disabilities and their caregivers once eligible. These include, but aren't limited to, the pharmaceutical grant, the prosthetics grant, the rental assistance grant, school support grants, and education grants. Additionally, we also supply a small business starter grant, our seed grants, for all persons interested in entrepreneurial development. All of these grants are available to citizens of Trinidad and Tobago with disabilities. So long as they meet the eligibility criteria, they will receive it. Mr. President, let us examine first, before continuing, the effective policies and programs and institutional frameworks used by other jurisdictions across the region and international landscapes to advance protection and equal treatment of persons with disabilities. Valuable insights emerge. Such comparative analysis revealed that Trinidad and Tobago, in reality, has been implementing several parallel strategies and initiatives that align with recognized best practices. The alignment underscores our country's ongoing commitment to advancing rights and well-being of persons with disabilities, while also indicating that continued refinement and expansion of our measures will position Trinidad and Tobago as a regional leader in disability inclusion. Lessons have been gleaned from best practices adopted by both the UK, Singapore, and even Brazil. They have all passed anti-discrimination and protection rights laws for persons with disabilities. Singapore currently has the Enabling Master Plan 2030, EMP. That's a national framework aimed at improving social, educational, and economic inclusion for persons with disabilities. In the area of employment, the UK, Brazil, and Singapore have also provided incentives to encourage employees to hire, train, and integrate persons with disabilities. Notably among them, Brazil mandates private sectors, companies to meet a hiring quota for persons with disabilities based on the company size. Housing is also a central part of protection for persons with disabilities. In the UK and Singapore, grant funding is made available to adapt homes to meet the needs of persons with disabilities. To support these measures, these countries, like Trinidad and Tobago, provide suites of direct financial assistance to persons with disabilities and support NGOs to deliver targeted services. These cover financial support grants, cash transfers, and transport subsidies to enable daily living and social participation. To address our way forward, Mr. President, the Ministry continues to provide financial and psychosocial support through its established grants programs, ensuring that persons with disabilities and their families have access to strong and reliable social safety nets. The disability grants for both adults and minors, along with psychosocial services delivered through our National Family Services Division, will remain essential components of the Ministry's approach to reducing vulnerability and enhancing quality of life of people with disabilities. These interventions help households meet their basic needs, support functional independence, and reduce the socio-economic pressures often experienced by families caring for persons with disabilities. Our ministry will continue to strengthen and fund partnerships with non-governmental organizations. These will provide specialized services to persons with disabilities, especially in the realms of education and preparation for employment. These organizations continue to play a critical role in delivering community-based support, skills development, rehabilitation, assistive device services, advocacy, and public education initiatives. Continued financial support for these NGOs therefore ensures a wide ecosystem of support services and complements the Ministry's direct interventions. Some of the key NGOs that deliver services to persons with disabilities that receive funding from our Ministry include the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association. They service the national body dedicated to promoting independence, welfare, and inclusion of persons who are blind or visually impaired. They fulfill a mandate through advocacy, rehabilitation, and empowerment services. This organization provides orientation and mobility training, daily living skills development, computer literacy using adaptive technology, alongside vocational training in craft and other trades. The Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association also offers advocacy for accessibility and disability rights, public awareness programs, counseling, and welfare support, complemented by low vision assessments, referrals, guidance for individuals transitioning into blindness, and community outreach initiatives that strengthen independence and social integration. I'm proud to say our ministry for fiscal 2025 allocated a subvention of $12,451,400 that was used to provide service for 5,860 persons. The next NGO is the Trinidad and Tobago Association for the Hearing Impaired, TAHI. They provide specialized education, audiological care, speech therapy, early intervention, and communication support services for children and adults who are hard of hearing. Through their key institutions, including the Cascade School for the Deaf, the Audrey Jeffers School for the Deaf, and the Diagnostic Research Educational Therapeutic Center of Hearing, DRECHI, we call it. TAHI delivers academic and vocational training, hearing assessments, hearing aid services, rehabilitation, and family support programs that promotes communication development, independence, and social inclusion. Our ministry for fiscal 2025 allowed TAHI to service 2,953 persons with a subvention of $12,371,200. The Lady Ho-Choi Centers of Trinidad and Tobago, well known to us, established in the 1960s, operating from Gasparillo, Cocorite, North Vocational Training Centers, and the Pinal Day Center and Training Center, as well as the Mamisa Center. The Lady Ho-Choi Centers offer a comprehensive range of services for persons with intellectual and development disabilities, including special education programs tailored to individual learning needs, academic instruction focused on functional literacy and life skills, vocational training in areas such as craft, sewing, agriculture, and pre-employment preparation. These centers, Mr. President, also through the residential care at the Mamisa Center, include full-time accommodation, supervised living, and daily assistance, while life skills and social development programs promote personal care, independence, socialization, and community integration for adults with disabilities. For fiscal 2025, our ministry aided with $16,363,900. The Goodwill Industries of the West Indies, Trinidad. This institution provides vocational training, skills development, rehabilitation, sheltered employment, and job placement services for persons with developmental and learning disabilities, such as autism, dyslexia, hearing impairment, cerebral palsy, other forms of mental and physical impairments. This organization accommodates up to 140 trainees annually, aged 15 years and over, and offers programs such as diagnostic assessments, training in garment construction, food preparation, applied arts, metal fabrication, woodworking, computer graphics, light manufacturing, and on-the-job placement support. For fiscal 2025, our ministry provided support with $564,413. Last to be mentioned, the National Center for Persons with Disabilities. It provides vocational rehabilitation, skills training, business services, counseling, and developmental support to promote effective integration of persons with disabilities into the wider community. It serves persons with developmental and learning disabilities, as well as those with hearing and speech impairments. This center accommodates up to 250 trainees annually, again, aged 15 years and over, and offers vocational assessments, remedial education, training, light manufacturing, and on-the-job training placement. For fiscal 2025, our ministry provided $799,360. The Ministry of the People, Social Development, and Family Services also provides one-off grants and funding for NGOs for special development and intervention programs. Initiatives have been supported through this mechanism for activities and programs that cater to disability awareness, advocacy, and sensitization. Moving on to the other issue raised regarding legislative advancements requested. our ministry does indeed continue to work on developing a more robust legislative framework through the proposed Persons with Disabilities Bill.
I'd like to propose that we suspend these proceedings at this time, and we shall resume at 5:15 p.m. This sitting is now suspended until 5:15 p.m. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. In resuming, I will address the request for legislative framework made by the Honourable Senator Lilith Etienne. Our ministry does indeed continue to work on developing a more robust legislative framework through the proposed Persons with Disabilities Bill, which seeks to improve accessibility standards, support independent living, and enhance mechanisms for protection from abuse, exploitation, and discrimination. This draft bill is aligned with the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Our next step is to have the draft bill reviewed by the Legislative Review Committee for further jurisdictional analysis. I will next go, Mr. President, to our ministry's Integrated Social Indicator Registry of Trinidad and Tobago, ICERT, for enhanced identification and targeting. We at the ministry intend to fully operationalize ICERT as a transformative tool for improving the identification, assessment, and support of persons living with disabilities in Trinidad and Tobago. Through integration of comprehensive data points, the system will allow the ministry to strengthen policy development, enhance targeting mechanisms for social protection grants, and expand the range of program responses available to persons with disabilities. The system's vulnerability scoring methodology, grounded in the multidimensional poverty index, will help the ministry to better identify individuals whose functional difficulties place them at heightened risk of poverty or exclusion, and tailor our responses accordingly. Mr. President, to further illustrate the Ministry of the People, Social Development and Family Services commitment to evidence-based approaches to addressing the issue raised in this motion, I will mention that the Ministry's Disability Affairs Unit commenced a study to assess these grants and services available to persons with disabilities and to ensure that their needs are being addressed. The preliminary findings of our study were utilized as a standard to guide ongoing initiatives within the ministry. Further work in this area will be used to identify gaps in the ministry's service, quality, and delivery to persons with disabilities, and to recommend areas for improvement. Our Disability Affairs Unit also commenced the development of a disability resource and referral database, a centralized repository of updated and verified information on disability-related services, organizations, and support mechanisms. This database also incorporates current research across multiple sectors and highlights international and local best practices in the disability service provision. This disability resource database is intended to serve as a knowledge hub for policymakers, service providers, researchers, and members of the public seeking reliable and up-to-date information relevant to the disability sector. Our ministry has conducted site visits to therapy service providers for persons with disabilities. As part of the Enhancing Disability Resource and Referral Database exercise, the DAU undertook site visits at 9 therapy service providers across Trinidad and Tobago between July 10th and 16th of last year, with a focused objective of enhancing its community outreach efforts and obtaining and updating the ministry's referral database. These visits were specifically targeted at therapy providers offering critical services to persons with disabilities, including physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech-language pathology and behavioral therapies. The information gathered during these visits informed a more accurate and comprehensive mapping of available services, allowing the ministry to better coordinate referrals and support the development of a more responsive and integrated service delivery framework. Mr. President, our government continues to improve access to therapeutic, health, and community-based services. Let us consider, as mentioned, our ministry's collaboration to operationalize the NEC. Our government's commitment to providing comprehensive therapeutic services and support for individuals with disabilities, with a focus on children with disabilities in the first phase, is being done here. The Centre aims to expand equitable access to high-quality, community-based therapy services, while also strengthening support systems for families and caregivers. Additionally, the NEC will serve as a hub for training and professional development in the fields of therapy, social work, and related disciplines. This was expanded on by our Minister of Health earlier today, and I will remind you, Mr. President, that they, across the floor, renamed the NEC to the NTRC, slapped a plaque on it, and never fully operationalized it. It was the central block of Port of Spain all over again. We, however, opened and operationalized the NEC. We offer a comprehensive suite of multidisciplinary services, including physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, behavioral therapy, and psychological services. Future phases of the NEC will introduce creative and recreational therapies, such as music, art, and aquatherapy, to further support holistic well-being for persons with disabilities. The Ministry of the People, Social Development and Family Services, and the Ministry of Health formalized our strategic partnership to operationalize service delivery and ensure long-term sustainability of this through our agreement in November of last year, as was mentioned by my Honourable Minister during her contribution. Together, the supporting documents will establish a governance framework, protocols, and mechanisms for oversight. Since the formalization of our partnership, our milestones achieved include the relocation of our Disability Affairs Unit to the facility in November of 2025, the hosting of hearing screening sessions in December 25 in collaboration with TAHI, and the commencement of administrative operations and clinical personnel by the Child Development Clinic from the SWRHA. Clinical services, Mr. President, finally officially commenced at the NEC on February 2nd, 2026. Not just a plaque on an empty building, but real service for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Next, Mr. President, the Ministry offers mental health support to address psychological disabilities through its Family Services Division, to ensure mental well-being of all our citizens, including those who are full-time caregivers for persons with physical disabilities, allowing benefit. Similar services are offered through wellness centers under the Ministry of Health. Additionally, the Ministry of Health supports persons with psychological disabilities to manage their diagnoses and live full and productive lives. Looking next, Mr. President, to enhancing accessibility and inclusive environments, I would wish to address the barriers that persons with disabilities face regarding provision of subsidized mobile devices. Mentioned briefly by my minister, I will expand, Mr. President. that our efforts to improve digital inclusion through continued implementation of the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago's subsidized mobile device initiative. This initiative seeks to bridge the digital divide between ensuring that persons with disabilities have access to affordable and appropriate communication tools, thereby promoting their independence, access to information, and participation in social and economic life. Through this program, the Disability Affairs Unit of our ministry facilitates the provision of subsidized mobile devices to prospective beneficiaries. In addition, the Ministry of the People, Social Development and Family Services has undertaken a school sensitization initiative on disability awareness and inclusion. Since September of last year, our Disability Affairs Unit has launched this program that promotes disability awareness and fosters inclusive practices across primary and secondary schools in Trinidad and Tobago. Because, Mr. President, we recognize that educating our youth about disability awareness now ensures inclusivity in the future. The Ministry of Education was also engaged on this initiative, and through them we piloted 22 schools with support from the Student Support Services Division. The Ministry of People, Social Development and Family Services held the inaugural sensitization at the Baratarian North Secondary School on the 16th of September of last year. Students received information and participated in interactive activities geared toward raising awareness about various disabilities and to end the stigma associated with them. Through age-appropriate, school-based sensitization, the program will reduce stigma, promote inclusive behaviors, and support the development of more inclusive learning environments. Outcomes from this pilot will continue to guide us to future expand additionally to schools nationwide. Our initiative will continue over the next 5 years. Mr. President, moving again to our sign language educational video series project mentioned by my minister, and I will expand, our DAU continues to work with TAHI towards the production of a series of informational and educational videos presented in Trinidad and Tobago Sign Language, aimed at familiarizing staff in working offices and government buildings and the wider public with simple key sign language concepts. This project will reduce the communication barrier between government staff workers and members of the general public, so that hearing impaired persons, Mr. President, will no longer be required or need to walk with their relatives or personal relations to allow translation and communication. This project is due to continue and launch this year. Next, I will address the issues of infrastructure raised by Senator Murray. I briefly remind that the Ministry of the People and Social Development and Family Services, in collaboration with the Ministry of Housing, is looking at the need for provision of accessible housing for persons with disabilities. Mr. President, a site visit to prospective housing options was done. Work has begun, and we are looking at housing designs and policy direction. This work continues now into this fiscal year. Also considering, Mr. President, the need for inclusive infrastructure, my line minister also mentioned the construction of an inclusive sporting arena. Permit me to expand on the ideas and work going forward. In September of last year, the Cabinet agreed to design and construct an inclusive sporting facility to supplement to support the NEC. This is to be located next to it in Carlson Field in Chagonas. This again shows our government's commitment to inclusion to persons with disabilities in all spheres of life. This complex is not mainly intended for competitive or elite sport, but focuses on providing therapeutic, recreational, and inclusive opportunities for persons with disabilities, supporting their physical, emotional, and social well-being, and complementing the NEC. The sporting arena is expected to fill a service gap in existing sports facilities which are inaccessible, underfunded, or not actively serving individuals with disabilities. The Ministry views this as a targeted intervention to address an unmet need. The complex will also serve as a model of an inclusive design, showcasing fully what accessible, universally designed recreational spaces should look like, thereby contributing to the advancement of disability rights and empowerment. During this fiscal, Mr. President, the Ministry will collaborate with ministries, agencies, sporting bodies, and development partners, such as the UNDP and UNICEF, the Trinidad and Tobago Special Olympics, and other NGOs towards the design and construction of this facility. In closing, Mr. President, the Ministry of the People, Social Development and Family Services will continue to foster strong partnerships with key national stakeholders and international development agencies to advance disability inclusion at all levels. These partnerships will focus on strengthening institutional capacity, improving the ability and use of disability-related data, and expanding access to training and technical assistance. Mr. President, it is my hope that my contribution reassures the goodly Senator Lilith Etienne of our commitment to this cause. Mr. President, I thank you and members of the Senate for my opportunity to contribute to this motion.
Senator Vishnu Dhanpaul.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon. And as usual, it's always good to see you again. Mr. President, I'll be brief to avoid falling victim to the law of diminishing returns. Mr. President, firstly, I'd like to apologize to all persons with disabilities in Trinidad and Tobago. As a nation, we have failed our citizens with disabilities miserably. Mr. President, the mover of this motion is not an ordinary citizen. Senator Lilith Etienne, as far as I'm aware, is the first visually impaired person to serve in the Senate of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. She's a UWI PhD candidate, an HR professional with extensive experience in disability training and employment. Mr. President, this motion, this very important motion, was first debated on the 26th of November 2025, almost 3 months ago. Mr. President, I would not call this time lapse a disrespectful response to the goodly senator, but it is just simply an extension of the scant courtesy that our society places on the issues facing people with disabilities. Mr. President, I commend the staff of the Parliament for the assistance provided to Senator Lilith Etienne. I'm not fully aware of the arrangements in place to make the Senator's life more comfortable as she does the people's work, but I'm very pleased to observe that an assistant has been assigned to the Senator. Mr. President, I can only hope that the Senator is also provided with transport by the Parliament to and from her home on every occasion that the Senate meets. Mr. President, Senator Lilith Etienne does not need our sympathy. She requires our actions. Mr. President, the motion states that the Equal Opportunity Act, Chapter 22, prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability and places a duty on public authorities to ensure equality of access to services and facilities. Mr. President, in this context, I also apologize on behalf of the Parliament, not this government or any previous government, not this party or any other party. I apologize on behalf of this Parliament. And why? This institution, which for decades had the power to act and did not act with the urgency that the lives of persons living with disabilities demanded. Mr. President, how could there be equality of access when most of our buildings have not been built for persons with disabilities to have easy access, especially those with wheelchairs? Mr. President, I also apologize to our elderly citizens who may simply need access to a government office to collect a pension check, but cannot climb the steps of a building that the law already required to be accessible. I apologize also to all persons with disabilities who have tried to navigate public transport in this country, only to find out that they could not be accommodated. Mr. President, our Constitution guaranteed equality to persons living with disabilities in Trinidad and Tobago before any of us took our seats in this chamber. Through you, Mr. President, Senator Lalit Etienne should not have the need for advocates and activists and motions in the Senate to secure and demand what was always hers by right. We have failed across every administration, every parliament, and every generation of legislators who allowed urgency to become delay and delay to become the norm. Unfortunately, this country was not built with persons with disabilities in mind. Mr. President, in this country, we still plant trees on the sidewalks. And drivers block wheelchair access at the side of the roads. Our traffic lights don't have the automatic beeping countdown. Our lifts, our elevators are not voice activated. A visually impaired person can never tell probably which floor they're on. Mr. President, just a few comments on the proposed strategic plan. Funding could be one of the most critical aspects of any disability strategic plan. Without a credible financing framework, even the best designed plan becomes aspirational rather than actionable. The strategic plan mentioned in the motion should establish a dedicated national disability fund, not as a line item in the national budget that can be quietly reduced when oil and gas revenues fall, but a statutory fund with its own structure. And this is not a very complex task to do. Anybody in the Budget Division of Trinidad and Tobago in the Ministry of Finance could accomplish this. Mr. President, a dedicated fund alone is not sufficient. A significant proportion of the cost of disability inclusion can be absorbed at little or no additional expense if we include accessibility requirements into our existing capital programs from the outset. For instance, if we incorporate disability expense into our public sector investment program or into our social investment program, social sector investment program, it can be achieved easily. Every new public building constructed with state funds should carry a mandatory condition of approval and disbursement, compliance with accessibility standards. This is standard practice in many jurisdictions. As can be seen from the Parliament building right the first time costs a fraction of retrofitting after the fact. And I have noticed a lot of retrofitting took place in this Parliament building. Mr. President, in addition, the private sector has both a responsibility and an economic interest in disability inclusion. The legislative framework accompanying this plan should introduce meaningful tax incentives for businesses that invest in accessible premises, acquire technology for employees with disabilities, and meet reasonable employment benchmarks. Based on my previous incarnation, Mr. President, this is easy to implement and easier to monitor. Mr. President, the World Bank has estimated that the exclusion of persons with disabilities from economic participation costs developing countries between 3 and 5% of GDP. In Trinidad and Tobago, that will translate to $5 to $10 billion. Mr. President, in closing, this motion is not a matter in which any side of this chamber can claim clean hands entirely. I say this honestly, and I say it in the spirit in which this debate should be conducted, not as a political exercise, but as a moment of political reckoning. Mr. President, the machinery of the state remains largely inhospitable to citizens with disability challenges. The Equal Opportunity Act already places a positive duty on public authorities to ensure equality of access. The law is not absent. The will to enforce it has been. We on this side fully support the motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jones, Senator Candace Jones-Simmons. Oh, she's not well. Okay. Who? Anybody else? Not today. Senator, the Honorable Minister of Labour, would you be prepared to intervene?
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this debate on a very important motion, as it were. The first private member's motion brought before this session of the Senate. I commend Senator Lalit Etienne for not wasting any time in bringing a motion that goes directly to the core of fairness, equality, social inclusion, and non-discrimination. I want to put my contribution has a lot to do with looking at this through the eyes of maybe, let's say, workers. Because from where I sit, I'm listening, but there's a dissonance between what I hear and particularly when I wore a different hat, what I saw happen in the world of work. We have a lot to fix when it comes to this, how we treat persons with disabilities. I think in listening to Senator Lalit Etienne and her contribution, and I thought she hit the nail on the head when she said that she created this distinction between ableism and disabled and disability, and where people view the disabled through a medical eyes, and they view the person as being in need to be repaired by words, something to treat, because they lack something, vis-a-vis being viewed as a person with a right. And it goes to the point of moving away from being this charity base to a rights base. Because from the world I come from, I've seen workers run out of their jobs over and over again. I've had to defend many a worker who, whether they become disabled whilst at work, they are quickly treated as an expenditure item that we need to, what's the term we use? Medically board them. If you happen to be in the public service or in the state sector, as the case might be. And it goes to, in a different sense, how when I hear Senator Senator Lewis mentioned the economic cost, because I've seen it. I could pull up on my phone even right now where an employee is being a disabled employee, a person with disability, who is being encouraged to be medically boarded. And she has asked for my intervention. You know what? She wanted to know what that means. She's in her 40s. She's been asked because she cannot contribute in the way she used to, that maybe she should be medically boarded. What that means, how am I going to take care of myself now that I am? And I want to be clear, she became disabled due to something that happened at work. And now she's faced with a choice where somebody wants her out of the job. She thought she was being accommodated, but then they start putting pressure on her. So she has asked for my intervention. What is the intervention? Tell me, what am I going to get when I am medically boarded? That's the reality of a lot of workers in the world of work. So whereas we will sit down here and, you know, when I listen to the contribution, we seem to be all on the same page. We seem to all care. But in practice, that's not the world of work. People are hung out of their jobs on a daily basis in this country when they become disabled. I think that is surely in part of what I know would have given as part of the reason for Senator Lee Etienne needing to come with this motion for us, because it is real out here. I have played a role where I've helped disabled persons to get jobs. But to keep jobs, it is difficult for persons with disabilities. And I really hope that we all will use our time to help change that mindset. A mindset where we no longer see a person with disability as somebody who needs to be fixed, some treatment, some person that we need to take care of, and is what it will cost and how long can we do it. But rather that we come to the point that these persons have a right to be here, a right to take care of their life, themselves, and take care of their families. Because that's the only how it's going to change, is that mindset. It's a mindset. It's a big debate that takes place every time, whether you get disabled because of something that happens on the job. And my God, if they have difficulty when you are become disabled because of something that happens on the job, or you're the victim of an accident, as the case might be, just try to imagine the difficulty for them to hire someone with disability. And we are not even in any way thinking about a person who all right, sorry. Right, but we're not even in any way dealing with the whole idea of with with what a normal disabled person when a person is trying to just simply be hired. That's what we face. I've faced dealing with that. People simply wanting a job. And for you to get past that, it is not that they're asking for a favor. They're just looking to be able to take care of their families, and they're citizens of the country. And being a citizen of the country, they have a right to work.
And make a meaningful contribution.
They have a right to work. They have a right to contribute. They want to pay taxes as anyone. I have a situation where a disabled person, again, became disabled, and I had to try to help them. They were living in a home, but now they're wheelchaired, but the bedroom is upstairs, and they have to be relocated. And they did not have a clue how to address a situation like that. And therefore, you have to go and try to intercede on their behalf. And what Senator Lalit Etienne is speaking about is that there's no other system that those things, you know what to do next. And that is part of our reality. We need to move from seeing persons as being in some kind of subject to some kind of ailment that needs to be cured, and rather as having a right as any other citizen in this country. And it's in the little things I want us to remember, because sometimes maybe we have something I like to call it temporary disabled. And when I say temporary disabled, right now, even at the Ministry of Labor, we are dealing with issues where people who were subjected to COVID-19, and the implications of long COVID, and persons who were, when they were out of the job, they were unable to work. They have reclassified these people and did not pay them for the time that they were away from the job. Because they were what? Disabled, albeit temporarily due to this COVID-19. And even where that is concerned, it's an uphill task to get the employer to accommodate persons when they are unable to work in the manner that they would have want to make how the employer would like the contribution to be made. If they're unable to do so, a lot of pulling teeth in whether they would allow the person to work from home. All those are issues, particularly when they wore another hat that you had to deal with. And by extension, the disabled person who seem to be altogether unable to make that same contribution, it's about pushing them out of their jobs. That is what we face with on a daily basis, and I would like to hope that we all recognize that. And if we all could contribute to changing that mindset, that would be a start in the right direction. At the Ministry of Labor, we have set about to try to help in changing that mindset, in using particular with some initiatives. Some of the initiatives, in the few minutes that I have, speak to, one, that we train persons within the ministry, and we have had the ILO help us with setting up an ecosystem of support to sustain disability inclusive employment. In doing so, our actions are centered on 4 R's. Ready environment, where we are looking at workplace policies, programs, and legislation, changing attitudes, and creating accessible spaces, and developing coordinated plans. The next R is ready persons with disabilities, where the focus is in facilitating job placements for persons with disabilities through our National Employment Service and preparing them for the world of work. This also includes creating collaborations with employers and their organization. We also engage in ready employers. This is about changing the mindsets and engaging employers as key stakeholders and, of course, ready entrepreneurs. And this involves supporting the development, the growth of micro and small enterprises by entrepreneurs with disabilities and promoting the cooperative model as an alternative form of business organization. From our discussions with the organizations of persons with disabilities, the general view is that persons wish to be part of the mainstream programs and initiatives that are designed to facilitate their involvement and integration rather than have separate services developed which can have the effect of further exclusion. However, at the ministry, we recognize the need for a balance where there are instances where specially designed programs may be necessary. As a first step, we have sought to put our house in order by building internal capacity on disability inclusion, interacting with persons with disabilities, and developing inclusive communication systems. Staff of the ministry have received training from the ILO and the government of Singapore on interacting with and empowering persons with disabilities, as well as on measures to promote greater inclusion. The ILO was engaged to provide training on employment of persons with disabilities. 2 sessions have been held in which nearly 50 persons were trained. The sessions include the staff of the Ministry of Labour, Small and Micro Enterprise Development, the Ministry of People and Social Development and Family Services, and the National Training Agency. Further, to these sessions, the ministry is in the process of working with the Cipriani Labour College of Labour and Cooperative Studies to introduce a compulsory module as part of all of its programs, which includes human resource management, industrial relations programs, the safety programs, that is occupational health and safety, and cooperative studies. We have also been meeting with the technocrats at the Ministry of People, Social Development and Family Services, the Ministry of Health, and the Tobago House of Assembly, the Equal Opportunity Commission, and the University of the West Indies to better understand the areas of convergence in our work on disability inclusion. We have also, Mr. President, conducted our own accessibility audit in terms of the physical facilities of all offices of the ministry, And we have utilized the US standard of built environment and created a checklist on the requirements of building based on same. Mr. President, we have also developed a national employment online network aimed at facilitating better access to job seekers and employers who wish to register with the National Employment Service. This will include accessibility features for persons with disabilities to easily navigate the online system. In closing, Mr. President, this administration has done quite a lot over 10 months to advance disability inclusion in our society. While I focus mainly on employment and entrepreneurship aspects of our work, my colleagues would have shared on education, health, social protection, and other areas where work has been advanced in disability inclusion. Our international commitment under the UNCRPD and the ILO conventions, combined with the existing national policies, such as the National Policy on the Persons with Disabilities and Equal Opportunities Act, provide a strong foundation. However, these frameworks must be continually reviewed and strengthened to address the remaining gaps that hinder full inclusion. The Ministry of 6 o'clock is for sure.
No, please. Member can continue, please.
The Ministry of Labour of Small and Micro Enterprise Development is committed to the provision of employment opportunities for all, including persons with disabilities. In this regard, we know that continued policy development and awareness building are needed to ensure that legal protections translate into meaningful workplace inclusion and equality. The Ministry pledges to maintain ongoing engagement with all relevant stakeholders to ensure that the lived realities of persons with disabilities are reflected in policy reforms and practical interventions. We have not only been chanting the slogan of "nothing about us without us," but demonstrating it with the genuine and meaningful engagement of our people living with disabilities. Let us move forward and with determination and unity to build a society that leaves no one behind. I thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed.
Honorable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.